Reborn on my wedding night, forced into love without the scumbag's elder brother. Reborn on the wedding night, spoiled by the scumbag elder brother. In the previous life, Yunzi thought she married the ideal husband, full of joy, and paved the way for her husband. In the end, Yunzi found that in the eyes of her so-called husband, she was just a chess piece that was used easily. She was busy for him all her life, but he was with other women. Their husband, who was obsessed with her, used her innocence to fight for the position of the head of the family, and then abandoned her like a worn-out shoe, locked her up in the other courtyard and cut her throat to death. Chapter 1, Reborn on my wedding night. Yunzi's entire body was burning. A strong, muscular body pressed down on her, and the scorching breath from all directions engulfed her, making her delicate figure tremble uncontrollably. She instinctively tried to break free from the restraint of the man above her, but he gripped her waist forcefully and pulled her back under him. Yunzi couldn't help but struggle, letting out a soft whimper, millimeter. She helplessly opened her eyes, only to be met with an almost devilishly handsome face. The rich scent of alcohol emanated from the man, his gaze dazed and hazy, while his hands rudely tore at the wedding gown on her body. Wait, wedding gown. Yunzi's mind buzzed, and she suddenly realized she had been reborn. In her past life, she had been overjoyed to marry her beloved Yunzi. Yet, on their wedding night, she somehow ended up in the bed of Yunzi's elder brother Yunzi, the current head of the Shin family. That night, Yunzi had caught her in bed with his brother. Even though he later pushed all the blame onto Yunzi, he had since lost all affection for her. He found her sullied and disgusting, treating her with cold indifference. To win back his love, Yunzi cried until she nearly went blind and even gave up all her dowry to please him. When her family, the Yi clan, learned of the scandal, they wanted to bring her back home. However, Yunzi refused, stubbornly staying in the Shin household, desperately trying to salvage Yunzi's love. To protect her position in the Shin family, the Yi clan continuously supported Yunzi in secret, helping him rise in power. At the same time, they harbored intense hatred toward Yunzi, believing he had ruined Yunzi, and they tried to assassinate him multiple times. Because she was unloved in the Shin residence, Yunzi lived a life of endless disdain and misery. In less than 3 years of marriage, she had withered like a flower past its prime, reduced to nothing but skin and bones. In her days, she had once again seen Yunzi. But the man she had loved so dearly appeared before her, holding another woman in his arms. In front of them stood a 3-year-old child, bearing a striking resemblance to them both. Husband, what is the meaning of this? Yunzi was utterly lost. She reached out, wanting to grasp the corner of Yunzi's robe, but he stomped on her hand cruelly, grinding it into the rubble beneath. They are my wife and child. Wife and child. If they are your family, then what am I? I am the wife you married through an honorable betrothal. Yunzi's eyes filled with blood, her voice shaking with grief and rage. Yunzi only sneered. Wife. It's time I stopped pretending, Yunzi. I never married you out of love. Yunzi has occupied the Shin family's leadership for too long. I needed someone to help me take him down, and that person was you? I deliberately sent you to his bed on our wedding night to frame him for violating his sister-in-law. As for you, I only used you for this play because of your family background. The power of the Yi clan was enough to pave my path to success. Their most cherished daughter was disgraced in the Shin household. To protect you, they had no choice but to bow to the Shin family and assist me. Not only did he bring Yunzi down, but he also gained the support of the Yi family. For Yunzi, this was a perfect victory. Now, the Shin family stands high in His Majesty's favor, and the Yi family is of no more use to me. As for you, you can go ahead and die. Yunzi's heart shattered. The woman beside Yunzi stepped forward, looking at her with scorn. Yunzi, I truly pity you. While you were writhing under Yunzi, your so-called wedding night, your husband was spending the night passionately with me. In fact, Cheng'er was conceived that very night. She chuckled, pushing the child forward. No. No. Yunzi's eyes were bloodshot, filled with utter hatred. Yunzi, you ruined me completely. From beginning to end, she had been nothing but a pawn. The man she had loved so deeply had only ever seen her as a tool. Yunzi died with boundless resentment, her throat slit by Yunzi, her hatred lingering beyond the grave. The only person who had been willing to bury her was the very man she had hated all her life, Yunzi. Yunzi's breath hitched. A sudden surge of pain from below brought her back to reality. If this continued, both she and Shinsayan would repeat the same tragic fate. Gritting her teeth, Yunzi swiftly regained her senses. She reached up and yanked out the hairpin securing Shinsayan's hair, stabbing it forcefully into his shoulder. Oh! His jet black hair cascaded like a waterfall, and the sharp pain momentarily sobered Shinsayan. Staring at the woman before him, his blood dripped onto her pale face. The trembling of her long lashes made his heart stir, and he abruptly sat up. Yunzi panted heavily, hastily pulling her clothes together while sitting upright on the bed. I need to help you get rid of the drug in your system first. She moved forward, trying to assist him, but he shot her a piercing glare, snatching the hairpin from her hand and stabbing it into the bed curtain. You are Shin-Yuming's new wife? If I recall correctly, today was supposed to be your wedding night. Shinsayan's gaze darkened, like a wolf on the verge of attack, ready to tear out her throat. Yunzi swallowed hard, meeting his gaze. You're right. It was Shin-Yuming who drugged me and sent me here, trying to ruin both our reputations and seize the position of Shin family head. Oh? But I remember Shin-Yuming being deeply devoted to you. Shinsayan deliberately emphasized the words, deeply devoted, his tone laced with disbelief. Hearing this, Yunzi couldn't help but laugh bitterly. Deeply devoted. Yes, Shin-Yuming had gone to great lengths for this grand act. When he had proposed to her, he made sure it became the talk of the entire city, likely just to ensure that tonight, everyone would believe that all the blame lay on Shinsayan. Shin-Yuming is nothing but a beast. Beasts can feel love. Yunzi scoffed. Shinsayan was taken aback by her remark. Finding her unexpectedly intriguing, he raised a brow and pulled out the hairpin from the bed curtain, waiting for her to continue. Bathed in the soft glow of the moon, his face exuded an enchanting, almost wicked charm. Despite his injuries, his dominance remained unshaken. Yunzi spoke, Shin-Yuming married me purely to use me and the Yi family. If he can use me, then Shinsayan, so can you. If you agree to work with me, the Yi clan will become your strongest ally. As the eldest daughter of the Yi family, I swear to help you uncover the truth you seek. She remembered Shinsayan had spent his entire life searching for the truth behind his mother's death in that fire. Shinsayan glanced at her. Under the flickering candlelight, the young woman's face was resolute, her delicate features stained with blood, yet she bloomed like a flower flourishing in the midst of carnage. His gaze flickered. Though he didn't know how she had learned of his hidden pursuit, it had been far too long since this household had seen some excitement. Besides, she had once been his savior. Just then, flickering torches approached from outside the Haiyan residence. Yunzi turned toward the doorway. It was Shin-Yuming. The memory of her throat being slit flashed vividly in her mind. She instinctively retreated, only to be pulled into the blankets by Shinsayan. If you want to live, stay quiet. The silk covers fell over her, blocking her view. Chapter 2, An Interesting Sister-in-Law. Shin-Yuming was thrown to the ground by Shinsayan, landing with a bruised and battered face, his hairpin disheveled, looking utterly wretched. Shinsayan sat leisurely on the couch, neither hurried nor slow. His position was just right, blocking Yunzi from view while allowing her to see Shin-Yuming's miserable state clearly. On the ground, Shin-Yuming struggled to get up like a pile of mud, glaring viciously at Shinsayan. Shinsayan, are you crazy? If you want to die, just say so. With the Shin family's wealth, hosting another funeral feast would be more than affordable. Shinsayan lifted his eyelids slightly, his gaze indifferent as he spoke unhurriedly. Hearing this, Shin-Yuming's face turned ashen. His lips trembled, and after a long pause, he forced a smile. My apologies, master of the house. My newlywed wife, Yunzi, disappeared in the middle of the night. I was anxious, and in my haste, I accidentally offended you, master. I beg for your forgiveness. His scrutinizing gaze fell upon the quilt on the bed. Underneath, Yunzi instinctively shrank back. Shinsayan parted his lips, his voice as cold as jade. You claim your new wife is in my room? Yes. Shin-Yuming nodded without hesitation, sweeping his gaze around the room. Shinsayan chuckled lightly, speaking leisurely, then by your reasoning, do you intend to search my Haiyan residence? Yunzi was stunned. Shinsayan actually allowed Shin-Yuming to search Haiyan residence? Was he going to betray her? Yunzi bit her lip, cold sweat breaking out in her palm from nervousness. At that moment, she suddenly noticed that there seemed to be a hidden passage under Shinsayan's bed. Without hesitation, Yunzi slipped through the passage, leaving Haiyan residence. The quilt remained undisturbed outside. After a long silence, Shinsayan spoke again. Shin Yuming. To search my courtyard. Shinsayan tapped the brocade couch beneath him with his fingertips, his tone steady. Even if I grant you 10 more lives, would you dare? I. Shinsayan's voice was calm, yet it instantly made Shin Yuming choke, unable to answer. The entire Haiyan residence was deathly silent, so quiet that a pin drop could be heard. The commotion just now had been quite loud, yet there was no sign of Yunzi. Could it be that she really wasn't here? If he failed to find her, given Shinsayan's temper, he would not be spared. Shin Yuming gritted his teeth, hesitating as he stepped back. A faint scent of blood lingered in the air. Just now, in a desperate attempt to protect herself, Yunzi had wounded him. The wound had yet to be bandaged. Noticing the hidden injuries on Shinsayan's body, Shin Yuming suddenly sensed a turning point. He took half a step forward again in excitement. Master, this concerns my newlywed wife. I must search, please understand. He signaled to the servant who had accompanied him. The servant understood and was just about to step forward when, in the next instant, a flash of steel turned him into a shredded mass of flesh and blood. A powerful internal force sent his remains flying out of the room in an instant. Shinsayan wiped his blade with Shin Yuming's wedding robe, slow and deliberate. You ask for my understanding, and I must comply. Apologies, dear brother. I don't appreciate people dirtying my courtyard. Shinsayan's smile was gentle. Shin Yuming felt an urgent need to relieve himself, but realizing he was still in Shinsayan's courtyard, he feared that the next moment, the blade in Shinsayan's hand would slice into his flesh. Shinsayan lifted his hand. With meticulous precision, he extracted the hairpin lodged in the back of Shin Yuming's hand. Brother, do you still wish to search? And no. Shin Yuming was so terrified that his soul nearly fled his body. Ignoring the searing pain as the hairpin was pulled free, he turned and bolted out of Haiyan residence. The hairpin tore a deep, gaping wound across the back of his hand. Shinsayan glanced at the brocade couch behind him. It was empty. What an interesting sister-in-law indeed. Yunzi wrapped herself in her robes and quietly returned to Shin Yuming's residence. The entire night had been nerve-wracking, leaving Yunzi trembling slightly, her head spinning with dizziness. Her body ached with exhaustion, and she didn't even know when she had fallen asleep. Her dreams were a chaotic mix of past and present memories. Deep into the night, Shin Yuming never returned. At dawn, the next morning, Yunzi gradually woke from her restless slumber. 2 maids who had been attending her walked in from outside. Madam, you're awake. Millimeter. Jilan glanced around and, seeing no sign of Shin Yuming, couldn't he help but ask in confusion, Madam, why is the young master not in the room? Could it be that on your wedding night, you had to spend it alone? Yu Shu gasped, covering her mouth in shock. Both maids looked at her with pity. Madam, as the eldest daughter of the Yi family, how could you suffer such a humiliation? Why call her madam? That scoundrel wasn't even here on their wedding night. Miss Yunzi is still our young lady. Both maids had accompanied her as part of her dowry from the Yi family. In her previous life, when she was caught in a scandal, these 2 maids had defended her to the end, firmly believing she was innocent and had been framed. To protect her, Jilan had been forced to sell herself as a concubine to the 3rd son of the Shin family, hoping he would help. Instead, she had been tormented to death. On the Mid-Autumn Festival, her corpse, covered in festering wounds, was found in a well. As for Yu Shu, thinking of the maid's tragic fates, Yunzi's eyes turned red, but she forced back her tears. This time, she would protect them. Help me get dressed. Yes, miss. Yunzi sat before the bronze mirror. She removed her wedding attire and changed into a blue cross-collared ruchuan. The hem of her dress trailed along the ground, accentuating her slender shoulders and delicate waist. Her neck was gracefully extended, her skin fair and radiant. Her features were naturally striking even without makeup, she stood out in any crowd. Her nose was high and straight, her lips crimson, her teeth pearly white. Her face looked as if it had been meticulously sculpted by Newer herself. Beneath the right corner of her lips was a small, red beauty mark, adding an air of enchantment and nobility. Looking at herself in the mirror, she gathered her long, dark hair and styled it into a married woman's bun once more. Just as she was about to rise. Bang! The door was kicked open. Shin Yuming stormed in, his face dark with fury. He grabbed Yunzi's collar and snarled, "You wretched woman! Where the hell were you last night? Chapter 3, What right do you have to suspect me? Anticipating Shin Yuming's sudden attack, Yunzi swiftly stepped back to evade him. The two maids immediately rushed forward to shield her. Young Master Shin, what are you doing? You left my lady alone in the bridal chamber, and now you have the audacity to come questioning her. If word of this reaches the Yi family, you will surely be punished. Shin Yuming appeared utterly disheveled, likely still shaken by Shin Sayan's actions. His chin was covered in stubble, his eyes bloodshot, and he looked as miserable as could be. Yunzi dusted off her collar, which had been dirted by Shin Yuming, then casually sat down, her gaze sweeping over him. With a smirk, she mocked. I heard that young Master Shin went mad at the family head's residence last night and was even thrown out. Her contemptuous eyes landed on Shin Yuming's heavily bandaged hand, making him instinctively shrink back from the heat of her stare. None of your damn business. I only went there to find you, he retorted angrily. Find me? Yunzi feigned ignorance. She tilted her head and asked, Shin Yuming, if you were looking for your new bride, why would you go to your elder brother's courtyard? Everyone in this household knows that I only entered the Shin family today. Before this, I had never even seen Shin Sayan. So why, then, were you searching for me in his courtyard? Unless you're suspecting that I was having an affair with him. Her voice rose in anger as she deliberately accused him. Shin Yuming, what right do you have to suspect me? I, Yunzi, was married into the Shin family in broad daylight, carried here in an 8-carriage bridal procession. Do you think you can humiliate and slander me so easily? Moreover, I heard that you went to Haiyan Pavilion last night with absolute certainty. You were so sure, could it be that you already knew what was going to happen there? Or perhaps, you were the one behind whatever shady business took place. Yunzi's sharp gaze pierced into Shin Yuming, her words forcing him to take several steps back, his expression growing uglier by the second. He stared at her in shock. Since when had Yunzi become so articulate and sharp-tongued? Gritting his teeth, Shin Yuming lashed out in frustration, stop twisting the truth. If you had been in the bridal chamber on our wedding night, I wouldn't have had to search for you. It was your own misconduct. The fact that you're arguing like this proves you're guilty. How could my Shin family have married a harlot like you? In his fury, Shin Yuming raised his uninjured hand, preparing to strike. Yunzi's eyes turned cold. Without hesitation, she kicked him squarely in the chest. Exhausted from his harrowing night and caught off guard by Yunzi's sudden attack, Shin Yuming failed to dodge. He was sent sprawling, his head slamming into the doorpost, instantly forming a swollen, blooded lump. Harlot. Yunzi repeated the word slowly, her tone eerily calm. With a derisive chuckle, she suddenly turned and strode toward the door. Yunzi, where are you going? Shin Yuming, confused, clutched his chest and head as he scrambled to follow her. He watched as she made her way without hesitation to the Shin family's ancestral hall. The Shin family had been renowned for generations as loyal warriors and were granted the title of Marquis of Martial Peace. The patriarch of the Shin family and the patriarch of the Yi family had been sworn brothers. It was only natural for Yunzi, as Shin Yuming's bride, to pay respects at the ancestral hall. Last night, after leaving Shin Sayan's residence, she had deliberately visited the ancestral hall. She had not only offered incense to the Shin family's ancestors but had also placed the Yi family patriarch's keepsake behind the ancestral tablets, preparing for precisely this moment to slap Shin Yuming in the face. She now retrieved the keepsake and, with deliberate calm, explained to Shin Yuming. I placed this here yesterday. The steward in charge of the ancestral hall can testify for me. Shin Yuming was stunned. He had not expected her to have such foresight. Words caught in his throat, and after a long moment, he could only mutter, if it was just to pay respects, why didn't you wait for me? Yes, why didn't I wait for you? To his surprise, Yunzi actually acknowledged his point, which threw him off completely. He looked at her in confusion, only to hear her continue. Before my wedding, my father repeatedly reminded me to pay my respects to the Shin ancestors on my wedding day. But you? On our wedding night, after the banquet ended, you were nowhere to be found, leaving me alone in the bridal chamber, waiting in vain. Shin Yuming, let me ask you, on our wedding night, where exactly were you? Could it be that you were having a secret rendezvous with some little wench? The moment the words secret rendezvous left her lips, Shin Yuming visibly flinched, suddenly uneasy. How could that be? In their past life, Shin Yuming had sent Yunzi to Shin Sayan, and finding himself alone on his wedding night, he had gone to meet his lover. He and that woman had personally told Yunzi as much. In this life, after suffering a great fright, Shin Yuming had spent the entire night away. Yunzi was fairly certain that he had once again gone to that woman. Seeing that Yunzi refused to let the matter go, Shin Yuming grew agitated. At that moment, the Shin family matriarch, Madame Shin Xiao, stormed in from outside, her expression thunderous. Yunzi, you are the newly wedded wife of the Shin family. How dare you speak to your husband in such a manner first thing in the morning? Yunzi turned her gaze toward the door. Madame Shin Xiao's face was ashen, her corpulent figure resembling that of a bear. Her eyes brimmed with malice and calculation. Seeing Yunzi remain silent, she stomped her foot and pointed accusingly at her. Yunzi, do you still think you're the precious daughter of the Prime Minister's family? Even if you are now a daughter-in-law of the Shin family. When you see me, you should kneel and pay your respects. Such defiance! The Shin family will discipline you properly. With her hands on her hips, Madame Shin Xiao shot Yunzi a condescending glare. She had spent years navigating the back courtyard and had dealt with countless women. She was certain that with a few beatings, Yunzi would be as obedient as a dog. At her signal, the two old servant women beside her immediately produced a half-meter-long leather whip, ready to strike Yunzi at a moment's notice. Yunzi raised her brows and glanced at them. In her past life, Madame Shin Xiao had tormented her mercilessly under the pretense of being her mother-in-law. She had been forced to kneel outside Madame Shin Xiao's door before dawn, waiting for her to wake up. If Madame Shin Xiao so much as had a headache, Yunzi had to spend the night copying scriptures and kowtowing in the ancestral hall to pray for her recovery. During meals, even Madame Shin Xiao's old maids could eat leisurely, while Yunzi had to stand by and serve. Only after everyone else had finished was she allowed to eat the leftovers. At night, she was even required to wash the feet of Madame Shin Xiao and her daughter. In her past life, she had endured it all, abiding by the so-called virtues of obedience and humility. But in this life, she would bow to no one. Every single person who had wronged her would pay with their lives. Madame Shin Xiao thought Yunzi was just another sheltered noblewoman. But in reality, she was a vengeful spirit that had crawled back from hell. Discipline her? They wish. Chapter 4, Shin Yuming's path to the imperial examination was cut off. Yunzi gave Jilan and Yusuzu a look, and the two maids understood. While Shin Xiao and Shin Yuming were not paying attention, they went directly to the gate of the Shin family's mansion and pushed open the tightly closed door. In the dim morning light, the big red lanterns hanging on the Shin family's gate have not yet been taken down, as if last night's happy event is still lingering. At this moment, the door of the Shin family suddenly opened, and many people looked inside with strange expressions. What's going on? The person sitting opposite old Madame Shin seems to be the newly married daughter of the Yi family. Look at her red eyes. Did she suffer some injustice after marrying into the Shin family? This. Back then, almost everyone in the imperial city knew that Shin Erlang loved Yunzi. He finally married her home with such a great deal of effort. How could he do such a tormenting thing? People outside were talking about it. The bride was bullied by her in-laws as soon as she entered the house. If this matter were to spread out, the entire Shin family would be criticized, and it might even affect Shin Yuming's future path to the imperial examination. Seeing this, Shin Xiao was completely panicked, and she twisted the maid beside her and shouted angrily, "Hurry up and close the door." It turns out that the Shin family is also afraid of losing face. Yunzi clicked her tongue. With all the gossip outside, for the sake of Shin Yuming's reputation, Shin Xiao naturally didn't dare to torture her at this critical juncture. Seeing that both Shin Xiao and Shin Yuming looked as if they had eaten a fly, Yunzi was in a good mood. She was too lazy to stare at them anymore and turned around and left the Shin family ancestral hall, leaving the two men gritting their teeth. Behind Yunzi, Jilan was worried and scared. What should we do? Miss is married into the Shin family after all. Both the Shin and Yi families are noble and prestigious families. How can they divorce easily? Miss is afraid that she will fall into the wolf's den of the Shin family. Now that we are making such a fuss, there will be no good life in the future. Yunzi raised her eyebrows and looked back at her, but smiled indifferently. If I surrender honestly, will they let me go? If you want to deal with evil people like them, you can only use evil methods. She had been an honest person all her life in her previous life, but in this life, she wanted to turn the Shin family upside down and make Shin Yuming and Shin Xiao suffer eternal damnation. Yushu nodded beside him. I think what the girl did was right. After all, it was Shin Erlang who made the mistake first. No matter what, Jilan and I will stay with the girl. Two maids, one on the left and one on the right, held Yunzi's hands. Yunzi felt warm in her heart. Her eyes flickered and she said, "You two go and help me with something first. Girl, just give me your orders. Jilan, you are very smart. Go to the courtyard and ask for me if there is any maid in the mansion whose maiden name is Jiao Jiao." In her previous life, Yunzi never saw Shen Yuming's mistress and his son until her death. In this life, since she was reborn, she must find out the way in advance so as to catch Shen Yuming off guard. Although Jilan didn't know what Yunzi was going to do, she had always been loyal and had no doubts about what Yunzi said. Seeing that Jilan was ready to do so, Yunzi raised her hand to stop her and said, "Ask the maids, old women, or cousins of the Shen family, including the people in the Shen Qiao family's courtyard." Jilan was startled, and seeing that Yunzi was so concerned about this person, she quickly nodded and said, "Don't worry, young lady, Jilan will definitely ask in detail." Yunzi nodded and sent Jilan away. She took out a box of excellent golden medicine from her dowry box and handed it to Yushu. "Send this medicine to Haiyanju." Haiyanju? Isn't that where the head of the Shen family lives? Yushu blinked, feeling a little confused. Yunzi nodded, feeling a little guilty. She stabbed Shinsayan in desperation yesterday and even slipped away from his room early. Now that Shinsayan has not exposed her, she must send something to him to express her gratitude. Yushu looked at her and said nothing, but obediently handed the things over. Yunzi leaned on the couch and waited quietly. Her dreams turned over and over. There was the despair of being locked up in the courtyard in her previous life and waiting to die. There was the desolation of her soul hanging in the air after death, and seeing Shinsayan, who had never returned to the Shen family, coming on the snow, holding her in his arms when she was only a handful of bones left, and collecting her body for her. There was also the little beggar she met in the back alley when she was young. Yunzi was sleeping soundly. In the afternoon, Jilan finally came back. Yunzi sat up from the couch and asked, "How is it?" "Miss, I have asked around, and I have never had a maid like Jiao Jiao or Jiao Jiao in your house, let alone Jiao Jiao." Yunzi was stunned and felt a little disappointed, but also felt that it was expected. In his previous life, although she was at fault first, in order to avoid being caught, Shen Yuming held it in for 3 years. He waited until he had completely established his foothold with the support of the Yi family before bringing that woman to her and angering her to death, to prove that Shen Yuming was not a fool. It is really risky to keep a mistress in the house. It is better to keep her outside where she will not be easily discovered and the mistress can enter the house and enjoy you without any effort. So the question is, where will Shen Yuming keep the person? Although she had been a wife of the Shen family for 2 lifetimes, she didn't know much about Shen Yuming. If we send someone to follow, it would obviously not be appropriate to let Jilan and Yushu go. She had just married into the Shen family, and her dowry only included maids but no servants, so they were still short of manpower. Yunzi hesitated for a moment and said, "Jilan, Yushu, help me with my makeup." "Girl, where are you going?" "I'm new to the Shen family, so naturally I have to pay a visit to the head of the family. She needs help, and Shinsayan is her only choice at the moment." Outside Haiyanju. Yesterday's bloodstains have been washed away, and the whole courtyard feels particularly peaceful and comfortable. Yunzi was helped in by her maid. This was her first time entering Shinsayan's Haiyan residence through the main gate. As soon as she entered the room, Yunzi saw a pile of black fox fur scattered on the ground. The man was lying casually on the armchair in the center of the fox fur coat, with a stream of light floating on his face, making his eyebrows and eyes clear and looking particularly peaceful. In a trance, there was no trace of the hostility from yesterday. At this moment, he was as quiet as a flawless jade. When people saw him, they would be fascinated by him and would always ignore the danger beneath him. Yunzi was stunned. She didn't know why, but when she saw Shinsayan again today, she didn't feel as nervous as she did last night. She unexpectedly felt that the person in front of her looked familiar. Has she seen Shinsayan somewhere before? Chapter 5, Applying Medicine to Him. While Yunzi was stunned, Shinsayan had already sat up. Yunzi paused, then came to her senses in an instant and said, "Since marrying into the Shen family, I have not had the chance to pay a visit to the head of the family. Today I have prepared a small gift to greet the head of the family." He. It's quite convincing. Yunzi was speechless and couldn't help but lift her eyelids to glare at him. In this situation, why didn't she pretend? Why did she have to make a big fuss about it, fearing that others would not know that they were having an affair. Yunzi felt a little embarrassed and placed the gift she had prepared on the table. I came here today to ask the head of the family for help. I and the maidservants who came with me as a dowry are all women, so it is inconvenient for us to move around in the mansion. Yunzi would like to ask the head of the family to help me keep an eye on Shin Yuming and see where he often stays outside the mansion. It would be great if we could catch Shin Yuming in contact with that woman. Shin Sayan didn't say anything. Yunzi looked at him, feeling a little anxious. She was about to continue negotiating with Shin Sayan, but she heard him speak in a teasing tone, but what he said had nothing to do with what she had just mentioned. You ran very fast last time. Yunzi was a little embarrassed. She knelt down neatly and apologized to Shin Sayan. Yesterday was Yunzi's fault. Har har. Shin Sayan smiled and said, where's the reward? You asked me to do something for you, shouldn't you give me some compensation? Shin Sayan's words were as if it should be. Yunzi was speechless and asked, what kind of compensation does the Shin family master want? The next second, the man pointed his slender finger at the medicine on the cabinet nearby. His voice was like the sound of jade, echoing in Yunzi's heart. Since you brought the medicine, and you were the one who stabbed me, then come and apply the medicine to me. Shin Sayan's voice was light, like a feather passing through Yunzi's heart. Yunzi's eyes paused. Although she was not sure what Shin Sayan meant, she was the one who hurt him in the past, and now she was the one asking him for help. Yunzi had no choice but to bite the bullet, step forward, pick up the medicine, and walk towards Shin Sayan. The latter swung his long arm, and the brocade robe slipped off his shoulders. The man had a great figure, and should have been a flawless jade with beautiful patterns, but there were countless scars of all sizes on his body, crisscrossed and intertwined, making people gasp. The wound on his shoulder had not yet been medicated, and although it was no longer bleeding, it still looked hideous. Yesterday, Yunzi was suddenly reborn, and it was another nightmare-like scene from her previous life, which made Yunzi act extremely harshly. Fortunately, Shin Sayan has a good foundation, otherwise if it were someone else, there would be a high probability that something would go wrong. Just bear with it, it might hurt a little. Yunzi blinked, carefully took the medicine and walked forward, applying it to Shin Sayan's wound bit by bit. The girl's fingertips are soft and delicate, and touching the body makes people feel itchy. Although Yunzi was nervous, she pouted subconsciously and blew on Shin Sayan's wound little by little. Her curled eyelashes made Shin Sayan's Adam's apple roll, and his memory instantly returned to the past. At that time, he was not yet the head of the Shin family. At that time, he was nothing, and his status was even lower than that of a stray dog on the roadside. Later, misfortunes happened to him frequently. With my current identity, there is no possibility of recognizing her. Yunzi's heart was beating like thunder at this moment. This was the first time she had such close contact with Shin Sayan, including in her previous life, and not counting the time on her wedding night when she was framed by Shin Yuming and was with him. Yunzi was so nervous that her hands almost shook several times. After finally applying the medicine, Yunzi was about to get up and leave, but because she had been squatting in front of Shin Sayan for too long, her legs went weak and she fell forward. Yunzi was shocked. She closed her eyes, thinking that she was going to fall to the ground and hurt her knee, but unexpectedly, the next second, the man stretched out his long arms and pulled her into his arms. The breath was gushing out, Yunzi was frightened and her face turned red, and she hurriedly moved away. I didn't mean it. It's okay. Shin Sayan paused, gathered his clothes, and spoke into the darkness. The river is clear. From today on, you will follow Miss Yi's instructions, and you can satisfy any of her orders. Yes. He Ching was the secret guard beside Shin Sayan. Yunzi glanced at him, said thank you, and left. Glancing at the gift brought by Yunzi, a smile appeared on Shin Sayan's lips. At the same time, in Shin Qiao's yard, Shin Yuming and Shin Qiao were very unwilling. I thought I had married someone who was easy to control, but I didn't expect that she was such a troublemaker and even wanted to control me, her mother-in-law. Now, we failed to use her to frame Shin Sayan, and instead we were controlled by her. What are we going to do in the future? Whenever Shin Qiao thought of Yunzi, she couldn't help but start to get anxious and angry. Thinking about how she had lost both her wife and her army and married such a disaster into her family, Shin Qiao was extremely unhappy. Shin Yuming comforted her softly, Mom, don't worry. This Yunzi is a junior after all. She's already married, so what else can she do? She is just feeling proud at the moment. If you use some tricks on her in the future, won't you still be able to control her? It's just that Jiao Jiao has been with me for many years. I originally thought that as long as I used Yunzi to get rid of Shinsayan, I could get Jiao Jiao back. Now it seems that Jiao Jiao and the baby in her belly will have to continue to suffer for a while. Shin Yuming shook his head and sighed, pretending to be full of affection. Shin Xiao couldn't tell whether she was happy or unhappy when she heard this. Although the Shin family has a successor, she is an unofficial concubine. This makes Shin Xiao feel a little uncomfortable. Unfortunately, Jiao Jiao is not a soft persimmon that is easy to control. She is not happy to let her come in as a concubine in the Wuan Marquis mansion. Why doesn't she go to heaven? However, their main target at the moment must be Yunzi. Don't worry, mother. Tomorrow is her return home day. I will find a way to make her surrender. Chapter 6, Mouth is also tight. That night, Shin Yuming was so angry that he didn't go back to Yimingju, but went to fool around with his mistress. This made Yunzi and Yimingju wish for it. She didn't want to be in the same room with such a despicable man at all. This would only remind her of the pain in her previous life, and she wanted to strangle him to death. No words were spoken that night. On the second day, Yunzi got up early and dressed up. After all, she was going back to her home, and even if she was going back with the scumbag, she had to pack well. After she put on her clothes and makeup, she opened the door. At this moment, there was a commotion in the Shin family's yard. Butler Liu was arranging the items needed for the return visit, and the servants were loading them onto the carriage one by one. A pair of yuyaoji. A yin-yang jade pendant. Yunzi found it strange. She wondered if Shin Xiao had changed her character by preparing such a nice gift for her. She felt strange and was about to ask when a voice came from behind her. Who asked you to prepare these things? It was Shin Yuming, who had just returned from outside. He was already angry, and when he saw the huge pile of things to bring back home, his face immediately fell. This voice interrupted the busy servants, and they were now in a dilemma as to whether to move or not. Husband, you haven't forgotten that today is the day to return home, right? Or do you look down on my Yi family and want to save even these things? Yunzi raised her head and looked at Shin Yuming, staring at him straight. Shin Yuming was stumped by these words. He looked at the small face and felt that it was different from before. Moreover, since the topic was about the Yi mansion, he couldn't say anything and could only keep it in his heart. It's just that the Shin family is not rich, and my eldest brother hasn't married yet. I have to leave him some things. Otherwise, what will people say about me as his younger brother? In reply to the second young master and second young madam, the head of the family asked me to prepare these things. He said that the second brother was not even sad about his own marriage, so as the head of the family, he must make arrangements. Yunzi was a little surprised when she heard this, but she didn't ask any more questions. This made Shin Yuming bite his gums and squeeze out a few words. Thank you, big brother. After a cup of tea, Butler Liu finally made all the arrangements. Shin Yuming and Yunzi got on the carriage and set off on the journey back to the Yi mansion. The carriage stopped in front of the Yi mansion, which was decorated with lights and full of joy. Shin Yuming and Yunzi walked in side by side, and the younger generations of the Yi family were waiting to greet them at the door. Shin Yuming was wearing a dark green robe with a jade belt around his waist. His face was handsome but a little gloomy. Yunzi was wearing a lavender dress. She had a graceful figure, picturesque features, a cool temperament, and a majestic presence without even getting angry. The two of them came to Madame Yi's Warong residence together. At this time, his father and mother were both in their hall. Grandmother, please accept your granddaughter's greetings. The two of them handed the teacups forward. Okay. Old Madame Yi nodded. Daddy and Mom, please accept my daughter's greetings. The two of them still held up the festive cups to Mr. Yi and his wife. Okay, it's time, kid. When she looked at her parents again, her eyes were filled with tears. In her previous life, her parents had always been thinking about her, but it was a lifetime ago when they met again. After offering tea to the old man and talking to his parents for a few words, Shin Yuming followed his father to the study, and Yunzi went to the peony garden. Before getting married, she always liked to wander around the garden in the backyard. She liked the quietness there and the fragrance of the flowers, which could make her mind clear. Soon, the servant from the mansion came over to say that it was time for dinner. At the banquet, Shin Yuming deliberately mentioned Yunzi's interesting stories in the Shin family, and his words were full of sarcasm. You all don't know, my Yunzi is a wonderful person in the Shin family. She dares to contradict her husband. It is said that a married woman should obey her husband, but she has not learned a thing. Shin Yuming looked at Yunzi. Before coming to the Yi mansion, he had been thinking about making her submit. Now that she is married, she must know the rule of obeying her husband. Yunzi sneered in her heart, but her expression remained unchanged as she responded calmly, "My husband, you are too kind. I am just doing my duty as a wife." Seeing that Yunzi did not show embarrassment as he wished, Shin Yuming said, "Oh? Really? I thought the daughters of the Yi family were all from wealthy families, how could they do such a thing?" Yunzi smiled slightly, her eyes were sharp. The Shin family's style emphasizes that husband and wife work together to manage the family business. Yunzi cooks just because she wants to share the joy of home with her husband. This is a good thing in the Shin family. Shin Yuming was speechless by Yunzi's answer. He didn't expect Yunzi to be so calm, and he was even more unwilling. Seeing this, the elders of the Yi mansion couldn't help but think more highly of Yunzi, but secretly shook their heads at Shin Yuming's mean behavior. Halfway through the banquet, Shin Yuming came up with another idea. He suggested writing a poem. He thought that if Yunzi couldn't write one, she would lose face. "Yunzi, since you are returning home today, why don't you compose a poem to help you enjoy yourself?" Shin Yuming looked at Yunzi with a smile. Yunzi nodded gently, stood up and walked to the center of the banquet, cleared her throat, and began to recite, "Purple air comes from the east, auspicious clouds open, and joy returns to the gate of the Yi mansion. Shin Lang's love is as deep as the sea, and Yunzi's heart is as hard as a rock. Husband and wife are birds of the same forest, and they share the same future together through thick and thin." After the poem, everyone in the room was amazed. Not only was Yunzi talented, but Shin Yuming's face became extremely ugly. His plan failed again. Yunzi's composure made every difficulty Shin Yuming encountered disappear. The people in the Yi family believed that Yunzi was a rare good daughter-in-law and a blessing to the Shin family. Although Shin Yuming was angry, he could do nothing about it. He could only grit his teeth and plan his next revenge. After dinner, Yunzi simply said hello to Shin Yuming and returned to her Washan courtyard. Her personal nurse Jin had already kept the courtyard in good order, leaving only a few maids and old women on duty. Seeing Yunzi walking into the room from afar, Nanny Jin greeted her happily and said with a smile, "Miss, you're back." Seeing Yunzi's calm face, Nanny Jin felt at ease. Yunzi nodded and went into their house, leaving only Nanny Jin, Ji Hua and Jilan behind, and asked everyone else to go and rest. "Nanny Jin, which of the servants in our yard do you think are more reliable?" Yunzi asked after taking a sip of the tea handed to her by Jilan. Nanny Jin thought for a moment and replied, "My son Li Fu, you know me, miss, I trust him to do his job. There are also 3 or 5 servants who have been here since our courtyard was built. Over the years, they have been doing things steadily and keeping their mouths shut." Yunzi gently put down the teacup, and the cup made a crisp sound when it hit the table. She pondered for a moment, and then said, "Then send a few people to check Shin Yuming's recent situation, especially who he has been in contact with." Nanny Jin, Ji Hua and Jilan were all stunned, thinking that the eldest daughter had just married into the Shin family. Why were they suddenly investigating her son-in-law? Nanny Jin is old and has a lot of thoughts. She said worriedly, "Miss, Shin Yuming is our son-in-law. Will he be unhappy if we investigate him like this?" Yunzi took a deep breath and tried to make herself look more relaxed. "I just want to know about his situation, I won't do anything." Chapter 7. Something is wrong. Go tell Shin Yuming that I'll be resting at Shin's house tonight. She recalled her blind infatuation with Shin Yuming in her previous life. She married him without knowing anything at that time, but ended up being killed by him. Now that she is reborn, she can no longer be led by the nose like in her previous life. If she wants to survive, she must understand the enemy, or she must strike first before the enemy strikes her. It was late at night. Yunzi took off her coat and lay down on the bed for a nap, but she tossed and turned like a pancake and could not fall asleep. On the first day after her rebirth, she was pulled back to those unforgettable days. Although she had been prepared, those distant memories had become blurred, as if separated by a layer of fog. Yunzi's head became heavier and heavier. As insects chirped at night, her breathing gradually became steady, and she finally fell into a sweet dream. When the sun shone into the room again, Yunzi rubbed her eyes, and just as she sat up, she heard Nanny Jin calling outside, "Miss, get up. The son-in-law went back to the Shin mansion for something and sent someone to notify you." Yunzi thought to herself, Shin Yuming was really careless. He didn't even ask her whether she wanted to go back. Got it. She responded, and the little maid Hongyun came in with toiletries. Yunzi took a look and realized that this maid was Hongyun. She remembered that when she got married in her previous life, the fourth girl Yi Qianlin had specially asked for this maid from her. Suddenly, an inexplicable feeling surged in her heart, as if all the bad luck in her past life was related to this red cloud. Yunzi's eyes instantly became sharp. Seeing this, Nanny Jin quickly took the wash basin from Hongyun's hand and said, "You guys go out first, and come back after the young lady has finished washing up." Hongyun and the other maids were a little overwhelmed, so they put down their things and left. When they reached the door, Hongyun's hands were still shaking slightly. "Is there something wrong with this girl?" Nanny Jin asked in a low voice while dripping floral water into the basin. Yunzi shook her head gently, as if to dispel those unpleasant memories. "It's nothing, I just feel uncomfortable watching her. Let's find a chance to let her go." Nanny Jin looked back at Jihua and Jilan. Both of them looked confused. She was also wondering, usually the maids in this yard were under the care of Jihua and Jilan, and Yunzi had never said anything bad about anyone. What happened today? As usual, after Yunzi finished washing up, she did not go directly to have breakfast, but decided to go to the old lady's yard to pay her respects first. This action surprised Nanny Jin. After all, Yunzi was not close to the old lady. Especially after what happened last night, today's change made her even more confused. Although Nanny Jin was puzzled, as Yunzi's old servant, she did not ask any more questions. After sorting everything out, the group took the shortcut to Huarongju. Arriving at Huarongju, Yunzi tidied her clothes a little and walked in. Liuli was serving the old lady a meal there, and was surprised to see Yunzi suddenly appear. "Greetings to grandmother." Yunzi's movements were elegant and well-mannered, with a faint smile on her face, more natural and intimate than usual. This kind of intimacy seemed to be innate, making people feel that it should be this way. The old lady swallowed the food in her mouth and looked at Yunzi's actions, feeling a little surprised. This granddaughter has never been close to her. In the past few years, except for necessary courtesy visits, she rarely came to Huarongju. Why did she suddenly change today? It's rare that you come so early in the morning. How about we eat something together? The old lady's voice was flat, neither too intimate nor too distant. Although Yunzi was not as gorgeous as her other sisters, her natural temperament was even better. Now that she was here, the old lady also wanted to see what was behind this sudden change. Yunzi walked gracefully to the old lady's side and sat down. The maid quickly added a set of bowls and chopsticks for her. She smiled slightly, picked up the chopsticks and began to pick up the dishes. "I was ignorant in the past and never served my grandmother well. Let me serve the food to her today," Yunzi said as she picked up the green bamboo shoots on the table. The old lady looked at Yunzi picking up her favorite dishes accurately, and a subtle expression appeared on her face. She thought, "How does this girl know what I like to eat?" Although she had never paid attention to these details before, the old lady's preference for food was well known. The expression on Yunzi's face changed slightly. If it was in the previous life, how could she know the old lady's preferences? But the old lady has always been thoughtful and good at observing other people's every move. It seems that this change is not just as simple as it seems on the surface. I remember when Yunzi was serving her mother when she was a child, the old lady always found ways to keep her busy in Huarongju. At that time, she knew the old lady's preferences very well. Yunzi put down her chopsticks, raised her head, looked at the old lady with clear eyes, and a smile on her lips. "My mother often talked about my grandmother's daily life, saying that when I grow up, I must be filial to my grandmother. I heard it many times, so I naturally remembered it. In the past, my second sister always took care of my grandmother, and I thought I wouldn't have to worry about it when she was there. But now my second sister is injured, and as the elder sister, of course I have to take over this responsibility." After hearing these words, the old lady felt much more comfortable. She originally thought that Yunzi came for her sister Yi Qianling's matter, but she didn't expect that she was busy for a long time and didn't mention a word. Looking at this usually inconspicuous granddaughter, the old lady suddenly found her much more pleasing to the eye. "You have such a filial heart, which is rare. I am old, and your elder brother is with your father in the court, so you young people are the only ones left around me. You are such a thoughtful child that you thought of coming to see me. Your mother taught you well, and you and your brother are both sensible and good children." As the old lady spoke, she gently held Yunzi's hand. That warm feeling, whether real or fake, made people feel particularly cozy at the moment. After chatting with the old lady for a while in Huarongju, the sun had already risen high. Yunzi said goodbye to the old lady and planned to return to Huashengyuan. Halfway through the journey, she seemed to remember something, turned around and said a few words to Jilan, then walked towards the Yulin courtyard of the fourth lady Yi Qianlin. The maid at the door saw Yunzi coming and quickly ran in to report. Quick! Hide these things! Yi Qianlin was excitedly looking at the palace jewelry sent by Madame Yi. When she heard that Yunzi was coming, she hurriedly asked someone to pack it up, and quickly ran back to the bed, covered herself with a quilt and pretended to sleep. How is the fourth young lady? As soon as Yunzi walked to the door, she saw the quilt on Yi Qianlin's bed moving. She sneered in her heart, but her face remained calm. As the maid opened the curtain, she walked into the room. When Hong Yu saw Yunzi coming in, she quickly replied, "Young miss, the fourth young lady has taken medicine and is resting." Chapter 8, Bear Heart and Leopard Courage. Yunzi asked casually, and before Hong Yu could reply, she tiptoed to the edge of Yi Qianlin's bed. She watched the uneasy dance under Yi Qianlin's eyes, and laughed secretly in her heart. "Oh, sister." Yi Qianlin seemed to realize that he was about to be exposed, and he suddenly woke up slowly. He opened his sleepy eyes and saw Yunzi, with a hint of surprise in his eyes. Yunzi looked calm on the outside, but she was secretly laughing in her heart. When did this illegitimate sister become such a perfect actress? Was she too naive, or was she hiding it too deeply? Seeing Yi Qianlin about to get up, Yunzi took the opportunity to lend a hand, her face as calm as water, a faint smile on her lips. "Fourth sister, lie down quickly, rest well, and recover soon. Otherwise, I will be worried for the rest of my life." As soon as these words fell, Yi Qianlin hid in the quilt and pinched herself hard, her eyes reddened with pain. "Sister, don't say that, I'm not in much pain." Before she finished speaking, Yi Qianlin stroked her cheek, tears rolling down her cheek like pearls from a broken string. Her pitiful appearance was truly heartbreaking. If it were in the previous life, Yunzi might have already softened her heart and obeyed her every word. But the past is gone, and Yunzi has seen through Yi Qianlin's true face. How can this play of sisterly love fool Yunzi? She knows clearly in her heart that the disaster she suffered in the pond that year was all caused by this deeply affectionate sister. You have been wronged. I have a very useful beauty secret. I will ask Hong Yu to get it for you later. Don't leave a scar on your face. Yunzi said as she carefully examined the scar, her expression changing subtly. She still has lingering fears from the incident of falling into the water. In this life, she had been prepared, knowing that there was a restless maid next to Song Yuanchun. The reason she went to Song Yuanchun that time was to arrange for the maid to dive into the pond in advance, so that Yi Qianlin could also taste the suffering she had suffered in her previous life. Nowadays, what women care most about is their appearance. Once they have scars, their husband's family will dislike them in the future, and even if they get married, their life will be difficult to have a happy life. Thank you, sister. Yi Qianlin was completely unaware of Yunzi's coldness, tears flashed in her eyes, and her voice trembled. She lowered her head and sighed softly. If I have a scar on my face, I'm afraid no one will want me in the future. I just hope I can stay by my sister's side. Yunzi's heart tightened. Looking at Yi Qianlin's sad face, she suddenly had a bad feeling and her hands unconsciously clenched into fists. Don't take it to heart. There are many panaceas in this world. I guarantee that the little marks on your face will disappear without a trace. Don't worry about leaving scars. Just rest assured and don't let your imagination run wild. Yunzi suppressed the anger in her heart. Although her voice was soft, it added a hint of alienation that was hard to detect. Yi Qianlin seemed to sense Yunzi's displeasure, her heart tightened, and she quickly said, I hope that sister's words will come true and don't leave any marks on my face. Otherwise, I am willing to work like a slave for you and follow you all my life. In this world, besides mother, sister treats me the best. Yi Qianlin's eyes were filled with grievance, but she had other intentions in mind. To put it bluntly, she lowered herself to a slave just to become the personal dowry. With this sacrifice, if Yunzi betrothed her to her future husband in the future, wouldn't that mean she would be able to fly up to the branch of the family? Besides, the Queen Mother's preference for Yunzi was well known, and it was already evident at the spring banquet, so her position as Lady Shin was just around the corner. Besides, Doctor Who also said that even if there were some scars left, it wouldn't be a big deal. With her looks, wouldn't it be easy to please her? Yunzi knew Yi Qianlin's plan very well, and her heart immediately sank. It turned out that Yi Qianlin had such a little thought. A flash of thought flashed through her mind, and she also saw the intimate scene between Yi Qianlin and Shen Yuming in her previous life. Yi Yunzi's fingers unconsciously dug into her palm, and the pain made her sober. What nonsense are you talking about? You are my sister, how can you be a maid? It will make people laugh at you. Yi Yunzi forced a smile and tried her best to suppress her anger. Just focus on recovering from your injuries. In May, Mother will go to Jingyuan Temple to pray for father and elder brother, and she said she will take us with her. The abbot there has superb medical skills and will definitely restore your face to its original state, perfect as before. As she spoke, Yi Yunzi inadvertently raised her eyes, and her gaze happened to meet the bruise on Hon Yu's wrist, who was standing beside her. Let me see your hand. Yi Yunzi's expression turned stern. In the past few days, she specially asked people to pay attention to Yulin courtyard. The purpose of Yi Qianlin's private teaching of Hon Yu before was self-evident. Yi Qianlin must have taken out her anger on Hon Yu for the embarrassment at last night's spring banquet. Since I have seen it today, I might as well bring it up on the table. After all, the old lady hates the behavior of mistreating servants the most. Yi Qianlin was startled, and her heart was immediately in turmoil. The Prime Minister's mansion has always treated servants well, and the eldest lady does not tolerate abuse. Last time, because she suspected Hon Yu's betrayal and was in a bad mood, she was a little too heavy-handed. Who would have thought that today was such a coincidence that Yi Yunzi caught her in the act? It's okay, I fell accidentally. Hon Yu subconsciously retracted her hand, her expression was evasive, and she glanced at Yi Qianlin from time to time. Yi Yunzi's face darkened slightly, and before Hon Yu finished speaking, she pulled her hand. The large bruise on her arm was obviously caused by being pinched. How could it be caused by a fall? Oh, who is so bold as to bully people in our Prime Minister's mansion? The rules in the mansion are very strict, and private actions are not allowed. Tell me quickly, what's going on? Yi Yunzi said with a stern face and her eyes becoming more and more fierce. Her eyes, which were usually bright as water, seemed to be covered with a layer of frost at this moment. Turning to Yi Qianlin, she said again, and you, how could you bear this humiliation without saying a word? Anyone who dared to do something to you must be bolder than the sky, right? Yi Yunzi's words were full of coldness, as if she was completely ignorant of the situation. She became more and more angry as she spoke, and she stood up suddenly. No, I have to tell my mother about this. You dared to touch even the maidservant beside you, do you still have your master in your eyes? Sister, please don't. Yi Qianlin's face turned pale when she heard this. If this matter is really investigated, wouldn't it be a slap in the face? What if it is found that she was the one who did it? How can I explain it to the old lady? She is always watching me. Thinking of this, Yi Qianlin broke out in a cold sweat, and without even bothering to wrap himself up in the quilt, he hurriedly grabbed Yi Yunzi. No one bullied me. Yesterday I had something urgent to do to my elder sister, so I asked Hon Yu to pass on a message. But you didn't come after waiting for a long time. It turned out that Hon Yu was lazy and went out to play. I got angry and punished her to boil water, but she accidentally burned her hand. Doctor who has seen it today and applied medicine. Don't worry, elder sister. Yi Yunzi reacted quickly enough and sneered in her heart. Seeing Hon Yu nodding repeatedly with tears in her eyes, she felt a chill in her heart, but did not ask any more questions. Chapter 9 Behind the Scenes. I did go and tell her. Sister Jilan said she would tell the eldest lady later. Hon Yu muttered softly, raised her head and glanced at Yi Qianlin. Seeing that the other party was glaring at her, she swallowed back the words that were on the tip of her tongue. Jilan was always by Yi Yunzi's side, and was also shocked when she heard this. She did accept Hon Yu's money, but she deliberately didn't pass on the message, hoping that Yi Yunzi would pay less attention to Yi Qianlin. Jilan's eyes flashed with panic, but she quickly concealed it, but Yi Yunzi caught it sharply. Yi Yunzi's heart sank, but she remained calm on the surface. My elder sister is here, what nonsense are you talking about? Why would Jilan deliberately not pass on the message? Yi Qianlin glared at Hon Yu fiercely, trying to protect Jilan. She knew clearly that Hon Yu was telling the truth and Jilan was bullying others by taking advantage of her power. Today, she had to teach this girl a lesson. Jilan felt even more resentful after hearing what Yi Qianlin said. She held the handkerchief tightly in her hand. Seeing Yi Yunzi looking at her, she immediately calmed down, Horn Yu did mention that the fourth young lady had something to do, but the eldest young lady was accompanying the old lady at the time, so we couldn't disturb her. After the Queen Mother left, I didn't have time to say anything, and the fourth young lady came to the front hall by herself, so the news didn't spread. Yunzi looked calm on the surface, but she was relieved in her heart. Her maid was smart, not bad. She could only teach her own people, and outsiders were not allowed to interfere. These words were like a slap in Yi Qianlin's face. She had punished her men indiscriminately. Now that the truth was out, she felt her face burning. Okay, let's stop here. Ji Yan's hand is injured, and you are short of manpower here, so I'll assign someone to you. Hong Yun, the second classmate in my yard, is steady, so let her cooperate with Horn Yu and lend a hand by your side. Yunzi glanced and caught a glimpse of Hong Yun dodging at the door. Her heart sank, but her face remained calm as usual. The majesty in her words made people shudder unconsciously. When Yi Qianlin heard Hong Yun's name, her heartstrings tightened and a trace of panic flashed in her eyes. She had tried to save Hong Yun and bribed her with it. Now Yunzi sent Hong Yun here. Did she notice something? Yi Qianlin's eyes flashed as she looked at Hong Yun. Hong Yun hurriedly shook her head and then knelt down in front of Yunzi. Miss, Hong Yun, did something wrong. I will correct it. Yunzi took in this scene, sneered inwardly, took a deep breath and said, What are you doing? I just asked you to help Horn Yu take care of the fourth young lady. Do you feel tired or don't want to listen to my orders? Yi Qianlin's face sank. What does Yunzi mean by this? Your people don't want to come to my place. It's obvious that they look down on me. From the main house to the concubine's courtyard, who would be willing to come? Isn't this deliberately embarrassing me? She glared at Hong Yun fiercely, secretly cursing Hong Yun for being stupid in her heart, but her face showed a bit of grievance. She turned to Yunzi and said, Don't worry, big sister. There are enough people in the yard. Mother often asks her sister Huansai to come over to help. Hong Yun doesn't have to come specially. Listening to Yunzi's words, Yi Qianlin secretly breathed a sigh of relief. It seemed that she didn't notice Hong Yun's problem. However, the maids sent by my mother were all senior maids. Do you think I would care about a second-class maid like you? Yunzi's lips curled up slightly, with a hint of playfulness in her smile. Huansai is an important person around mother after all, it would be inconvenient for her to come and serve you often. Hong Yun is steady, even if you are worried, let her take care of you temporarily, I will feel more at ease, so don't refuse. After finishing her words, Yunzi sighed softly, as if she remembered something. Oh, I have a root of old mountain ginseng here, it is very good for removing dampness and cold, I'll give it to you. Horn Yu's hands are inconvenient, so let Hong Yun make ginseng soup. Yunzi gave Jihua a look, and Jihua understood what she meant. She immediately took the ginseng from the maid next to her and put it into Hong Yun's arms. Hong Yun didn't know whether to take it or not, so she had to accept it reluctantly. Yi Qianlin was very unhappy in her heart, but she could only say thank you and force a smile that was uglier than crying. After Yunzi and the others walked away, Yi Qianlin flicked his hand and the pillow flew out with a bang. He had wanted to take advantage of the stingy Yunzi today, but she cleverly tricked him instead. He felt like he was slapped in the face. Yi Qianlin was filled with rage, his eyes widened, his mind full of thoughts of revenge, and his eyes flashed with a cunning light. All the way from Yulin courtyard to Huashan courtyard, Yunzi said nothing. Jihua and Ji Yan followed closely behind her, and they could feel that the air around them had frozen. The two occasionally exchanged glances but didn't dare to say anything. Ji Yan felt like there was a rabbit in her heart, fluttering around. She could guess why the eldest lady was so angry. As soon as she stepped into Huashan courtyard, Yunzi glanced at the busy servants. Although her face was calm, it was a little cold. Her clear eyes were as deep as a pool, and there was a chill in her calmness, which made people feel nervous. Jihua, gather everyone in the front yard. I have something to announce. Yunzi was about to enter the house when she suddenly stopped, turned around and gave the order. Jihua's heart tightened, she secretly glanced at Ji Yan, and quickly responded to do it. Ji Yan rubbed the corner of her clothes nervously, secretly regretting her impulsiveness, but she really couldn't stand others treating the eldest daughter as a fool, saying one thing in front of her and another behind her back. Today, the eldest lady assigned the servants in the courtyard to Yi Qianlin. Just thinking about it makes me feel depressed. Although I am a little worried, I feel more unwilling and aggrieved. Soon, Jihua gathered more than 20 people in the courtyard. Yunzi sat down and slowly scanned the crowd. Some of them were familiar to her, but some faces were blurred due to the passage of time. I have invited everyone here today because I have a few things to say. Yunzi spoke gently, and under the sunlight, she looked particularly energetic. Her appearance was not stunning, but the temperament she exuded from inside out was something that others could not match. At least in the Prime Minister's mansion, other young ladies did not have this aura. Everyone looked at each other. It was rare to see the young lady so serious. Although they were a little curious, they did not care too much. After all, the eldest lady had a gentle personality on weekdays and was always tolerant of small mistakes made by servants. Over time, the servants in Huashan courtyard became much more relaxed. Yunzi looked at the indifferent expressions of the crowd and her heart sank. The corners of her mouth rose slightly and her voice was as gentle as a spring breeze, but with a hint of coldness and majesty that could not be ignored. You were all picked for me by my mother. I haven't changed anyone in all these years. Even the newcomers have been here for more than a year. Compared with other courtyards, you can be considered as veterans. I think you all know the rules of this mansion. Today, I will only emphasize 3 points. If anyone is seated, they will know what to do. As she spoke, she raised her eyes slightly and scanned the whole place. There was a hint of coldness in her bright eyes. First, since you have entered Huashan courtyard, you must be sure who your master is. If I catch you with second thoughts, the door of the washing courtyard will be open to you at any time. There is no shortage of manpower there. Chapter 10 The Gesture of Silence. As soon as the words fell, the crowd was in an uproar, with everyone feeling anxious and wondering whether their pocket money was too much or too little. The new reward and punishment rules made everyone feel a lot of pressure. The eldest daughter usually looked easygoing, but who would have thought that she was so efficient in managing people? Yunzi sat leisurely in the front, picked up the teacup slowly and took a few sips. Perhaps it was this calmness that made everyone feel that Yunzi was unfathomable. For a moment, no one dared to say anything. After a few whispers, the scene slowly quieted down. As the atmosphere eased, Nanny Jin followed Yunzi's instructions, took out the list she had just prepared, and called out the names one by one. Those who were called came forward to receive the money bag, which contained the pocket money for next month. Seeing that the day was approaching, it was a good opportunity to distribute it. My lady, I am not satisfied with this amount. Aunt Lee took the purse and counted it, finding that it was 1/3 less than before. After being in the Yi mansion for so long, even the popular maidservant around the master had to give her some face. Now that the eldest lady suddenly cut her pocket money, how could she swallow this breath? Yunzi was drinking tea leisurely. After hearing what Aunt Lee said, her fingers paused slightly, but she still drank a sip of tea as if nothing had happened and then gently put down the cup. Aunt Lee, do you think I gave you too little, or do you think you should get more? Yunzi's eyes were clear, and the corners of her mouth were slightly raised with a faint smile, but this smile made people feel an inexplicable chill. Miss, I have been working in Huashan court for many years. I believe that I have never done anything to make you unhappy or uncomfortable, let alone anything that you cannot tolerate. This reduction in salary is really hard for me to accept. Even if you are the madam, you have to give me an explanation. Yunzi's heart sank. He wanted to use the eldest lady to pressure her? A cold light flashed in her eyes, but she remained calm on the surface. She brushed her hair away from her forehead, and the majesty she inadvertently revealed made people dare not look directly at her. You want an explanation? Then listen carefully. On the 3rd day of last month, my cousin sent a basket of linglong fruit. Without going through Nanny Jin, you brought it in directly, but you only gave me half of the basket. Aunt Lee's heart skipped a beat. The linglong fruit was a rare commodity, and seeing that no one was around, she quietly hid a few in her room, thinking that no one would notice. But when the eldest lady brought it up, her heart was beating like a drum and her legs went weak. Also, when you were cleaning the room at the end of the month, you knocked over the glass bottle next to the screen, and you didn't tell Nanny Jin, but secretly glued it back on. Am I right? Yunzi stood up and looked down at Aunt Lee. There was a coldness in her clear eyes that made people dare not look at her. When Aunt Lee heard the word glass bottle, she began to tremble all over. She thought she had done it perfectly, but she didn't expect the eldest lady to act as if she had seen it with her own eyes. That look seemed to be able to see through everything. She was extremely nervous. Although it was a nice spring breeze, beads of sweat the size of beans were quietly oozing out of Aunt Lee's forehead. Yunzi thought back to her past life. She was kind and turned a blind eye to all these things. Now that she is living again, she must punish them. She must teach them a lesson in this life. Miss, I really don't dare to do it again. Please forgive me this time. Aunt Lee was a veteran in the backyard after all. She knew that there was no way out, so she simply stopped resisting. She only hoped that the young lady would be as tolerant as usual and give her another chance. Yunzi's face was expressionless. She showed neither any intention of forgiving Aunt Lee nor any sign of punishing her. She was as calm as water. Everyone received their own money bags, some counted the money happily, some looked sad. Even if some people were unwilling to accept it, they felt nervous after seeing what happened to Aunt Lee, and they held back the complaints that were about to come out of their mouths. For a moment, although there were still some whispers, no one was making loud noises anymore. The noise around her gradually died down. Yunzi gently placed the teacup back on the table and slowly stood up, her movements extremely graceful. Her eyes were as clear as spring water, and her calm face was more solemn. Now I'm giving you a choice. If you are not satisfied with my arrangement, I can give you an extra month's salary and let you go. If you are willing to stay in Huashan courtyard, you must abide by my rules. If you cannot be self-disciplined, don't blame me for being ruthless. Everyone shuddered. Yunzi's white dress swayed gently in the breeze, adding a touch of otherworldly charm. The inconspicuous girl on weekdays now exuded an indescribable maturity and stability in the eyes of everyone, as well as awe-inspiring majesty. After the words fell, no one responded for a long time. Yunzi glanced at everyone one by one, and the corners of her mouth raised slightly. If no one says anything, it means they have decided to stay. I hope everyone can do their best in the future, and I will certainly not treat you unfairly. Yunzi looked around, and everyone's heart tightened involuntarily. Who doesn't know that Huashan courtyard is the most comfortable place in the Prime Minister's mansion? Even if the monthly salary is a little less than before, it is still a treatment that other courtyards can't even dream of. At this moment, who dares to complain? Yunzi sighed inwardly, and seeing that everyone was silent, she waved her hand, signaling everyone to disperse. On the other side, Yunzi was listening to his subordinates reporting Yunzi's reaction today. When he heard that Yunzi looked indifferent, Yunzi's face also darkened. Yunzi recalled the past when Yunzi would always cling to him every time they met, and was extremely shy. But now, Yunzi would not even bother to look at him. Yunzi felt that his appeal to Yunzi was like a slide. When did he, Yunzi, become so coldly treated by a little girl? His slender fingers tapped out rhythmic beats on the table, and the abacus in his head kept clacking. After a moment, Yunzi raised a playful smile and said, "Let's go and see my future wife." Yunzi was completely confused now. Looking at Yunzi's back as he walked out the door, she quickly grabbed her coat and followed him. When Yushu walked in, she saw the table full of untouched dishes in front of Yunzi, and she couldn't help but sigh. Just as she was about to say a few words of comfort, Yunzi said, "You go out first." After Yushu left, Yunzi raised her hand and stared at the bracelet Shinsayan gave her. Her fingertips gently stroked each ring, but her heart felt like it was hollowed out. As soon as Yunzi stepped into Huashan courtyard, he saw a group of maids with their heads lowered. Ever since Yunzi bravely protected them during the barbecue, these girls have followed Yunzi wholeheartedly. Seeing that it was him, the maids stood up suddenly to salute. Yunzi waved his hand, put his index finger to his lips, and made a gesture of silence. He walked straight to Yunzi's room. When the door opened, he saw Yunzi standing in front of the window, her back revealing a sense of coldness and arrogance. Chapter 11, Through Fire and Water. Yunzi looked at the back and couldn't help but be slightly distracted. Yunzi did not turn around, thinking it was Yushu, and said calmly, "Yushu, I told you, I have no appetite. Share the food with the other sisters." Yunzi frowned. This guy hasn't eaten for a day. He took a few steps forward and asked, "Yunzi, I'm here to take you home." When Yunzi heard that it was Yunzi, she turned around and faced him, her face still indifferent. "I thought my husband had forgotten to marry a wife, and I didn't see you come to pick me up." Yunzi walked around Yunzi and returned to sit beside the bed, leaving Yunzi standing there in a daze. He didn't expect her to be so calm. Yunzi turned around, his eyes fell on Yunzi, who looked like a fairy in a painting, and he was puzzled. "How dare I forget, I like you the most." The corners of Yunzi's mouth rose slightly, which made Yunzi distracted for a moment. She winked at Yushu, and Yushu hurriedly packed up her belongings and told the wet nurse. Shin Yuming stared at Yunzi. She still stood straight, not even willing to give him a glance. A sneer welled up in his heart, and he walked out of Washing Yuan first. You Mingju. Shin Yuming stared at Yunzi angrily, his eyes seemed to be able to spit fire. The air around him was full of hostility, but Yunzi met his gaze without fear, with only calmness and indifference in her eyes. This attitude angered Shin Yuming even more. My husband, you have taken me back. Yunzi said calmly, you can go anywhere now. Shin Yuming's anger grew even stronger. He stared at her fiercely, as if he wanted to see through her. You are very good. You are the first woman who can make me angry. After saying that, he angrily threw his sleeves and turned away. Soon, Jilan and Yushu were sent back. In the evening, Yunzi came to Haianju alone to find Shinsayan. Master Shin, you are free now. Yunzi smiled. A barely perceptible sneer appeared on Shinsayan's lips. Please sit down first. As he said that, he turned and walked into the study. After the two of them sat down in the study. Yang, is there any news about that woman? Yunzi's tone was gentle, but she couldn't hide a hint of anxiety. Shinsayan revealed all the information about Jiao Jiao he had obtained from the investigation to Yunzi, with a barely perceptible worry in his tone. Jiao Jiao is indeed a very special person. Not only is she stunningly beautiful, but she is also very thoughtful. She has had a complicated relationship with Yu Ming since her early years. She was placed outside the mansion, but it was a secret in Yu Ming's heart. If this matter is not handled properly, something unexpected may happen. Yunzi smiled and said, so it's being kept outside. Aren't you worried? Shinsayan found it very interesting. He knew Yunzi's past. She had always been chasing after Shin Yuming, but now that they were married, things were different. Yunzi's eyes flashed with a complicated look when she heard this. She opened her red lips slightly, and her voice was soft but firm. In this case, I am willing to give it a try. I will pretend to be in harmony with Yu Ming, and use this as bait to lure Jiao Jiao out. I hope this move can kill two birds with one stone, not only relieving our worries, but also allowing Yu Ming to see his true intentions. Hearing this, Shinsayan looked at the woman in front of him with scrutiny. She was no longer the weak woman who followed Shin Yuming blindly, but had her own edge and wisdom. Although this plan is good, you have to be careful. Yuming is not an easy person to deal with. If you are not careful, you will be put in danger. Yunzi smiled slightly, with a hint of bitterness in her smile. I know it's dangerous, but for the truth, I'm willing to take the risk. Besides, if I don't do this, how can I find out how many secrets he has hidden in his heart that I don't know about? Shinsayan sighed lightly, and finally nodded, with mixed feelings in his heart. Okay, I will support you in secret. I hope everything goes well for you. Remember, no matter when, your safety is the most important. As the two men talked to this point, the atmosphere in the house became heavy and the sound of wind outside the window gradually picked up, as if foreshadowing the coming storm. Yunzi turned around and was about to leave, but stopped and looked back at Shinsayan, her eyes flashing with complex gratitude and determination. Thank you, Sayan. No matter what the outcome is, I will remember it in my heart. Shinsayan watched her leave silently. The next day, Yunzi really ate up all the food that was sent to her, but she looked even more listless, like a puppet without a soul. At night, Yunzi stepped into Shin Yuming's residence. Snowflakes were falling outside. She stood quietly in the snow, motionless. When Shin Yuming saw this, he was anxious and angry, and dragged her into the house. Yunzi's eyes were empty, and Shin Yuming looked at her, feeling helpless. This woman could always easily provoke his anger, and he was helpless against her. Yunzi was not the kind of person who would only take hard measures and not soft measures. Shin Yuming adjusted his mood and said in a gentle tone, if you need to find me, you don't have to come in person. Just send someone to notify me. Yunzi finally reacted and turned to look at Shin Yuming. This was the first time she had looked at him directly in such a long time. She wanted to pretend to please him. Shin Yuming was relieved to see Yunzi finally react, but he remained calm. He gently brushed the snow off Yunzi's shoulders and said softly, it's late at night and the snow is heavy. If you have any questions, please tell me. A complex emotion flashed across Yunzi's eyes. Her voice was low and hoarse, as if it came from the abyss. Husband, I just miss you. Shin Yuming was shocked when he heard this. He didn't expect Yunzi's situation to be so dangerous. He immediately stood up, held her hand tightly, and said firmly, Yunzi, am I not here? A trace of gratitude flashed across Yunzi's eyes, and she whispered, "Husband, why are you so good to me?" Shin Yuming smiled slightly, with a hint of affection in his eyes. "My dear, Shin Yuming, am willing to go through fire and water for you." A warm current surged in Yunzi's heart. She knew that Shin Yuming's words were sincere. She nodded gently, her eyes full of trust. "Husband, I believe you." Shin Yuming gently put his arm around Yunzi's shoulders, led her to the warm stove, and put a thick cloak on her. He said softly, "Miss, warm yourself up first. I will send someone to find a doctor and medicine." Yunzi snuggled up to Shin Yuming, feeling the warmth coming from him, and the fear and anxiety in her heart gradually subsided. She whispered, "My husband, as long as you are here, I am no longer afraid." Shin Yuming smiled slightly, his eyes full of doting. "Miss, there is no need to thank me between you and me. Your business is my business." At this time, Yushu walked into the room lightly. Seeing the two of them so close, she couldn't help but smile knowingly and said softly, "Husband, miss, the hot water is ready. Miss can take a bath first to drive away the cold." Chapter 12 Shameless. Shin Yuming nodded and said to Yunzi, "Go ahead and take a nice hot bath. I'll wait for you here." Yunzi nodded slightly, stood up and walked towards the bathroom. Shin Yuming watched her leave. It was late at night, but the lights in Yumingju were still bright. When she woke up again, Yunzi prepared a meal for Shin Yuming in order to get information about Jiao Jiao. She went to his dormitory and looked at him, trying to find a hint of tenderness in his eyes. However, he seemed to really treat her as a stranger. Shin Yuming found Yunzi fiddling with the food on the table. He frowned and said coldly, "Why are you in my dormitory? I don't like people staying in my room for a long time." Yunzi paused as she was placing the dishes and chopsticks. She suppressed her anger and turned to Shin Yuming and forced a smile. "Husband, these are your favorite foods. Please eat them first. When you are done, call me and I will clean up." After saying this, Yunzi left the room. Shin Yuming looked at the food on the table, feeling inexplicably irritated and his headache still persisting. He simply ignored everything and got up and left. Yunzi waited outside for a long time, but there was no sign of Shin Yuming. She thought something had happened to him again. When she entered the room, there was no sign of Shin Yuming. Yunzi looked at the cold food, silently picked up the chopsticks and started eating. This was something she had prepared specially for him early in the morning. If he didn't eat it, she would. Shin Yuming went out for a long time, and Yunzi fell asleep leaning against the door. She had been thinking of finding out the news about his mistress Jiao Jiao, but unexpectedly, she met Jiao Jiao soon. When Shin Yuming came back, he saw Yunzi sleeping against the door, with a frown on his face. Jiao Jiao leaned on Shin Yuming's shoulder, tilted her head and asked curiously, "Yuming, who is this?" Shin Yuming rubbed Jiao Jiao's head lovingly and said with a smile, "Don't mind it. If you are unhappy, I will let her go back to her room." Yunzi got up in the morning and smiled at Shin Yuming, as if she didn't see Jiao Jiao. "You're back? Who is this?" When Yushu woke up, she didn't see Yunzi. She guessed that she must be in Shin Yuming's villa, so she grabbed her cloak and ran over in a hurry. However, she ran into Shin Yuming standing in front of Yunzi with another woman. Yushu noticed that Yunzi was so weak that she could barely stand, but Shin Yuming ignored her and walked into their house on his own. Yunzi's heart seemed to sink into an ice cellar. Looking at the intimate backs of the two, her body swayed and she almost fell down. Yushu hurried forward and supported Yunzi with great effort, tears welling up in her eyes. She thought to herself, how could the son-in-law treat the eldest brother like this? Even Yin Yu, who was standing by, couldn't bear to see this and was about to step forward to help, but Jiao Jiao stopped and turned around, pretending to be surprised and looked at Yunzi who had fallen to the ground. "Yu Ming, she seems to have fainted. Do you want Yin Yu to find a doctor to check it out?" Shin Yuming brought the rice cake to Jiao Jiao's mouth. Jiao Jiao took a bite shyly and looked up, meeting Shin Yuming's doting eyes. Her cheeks flushed and she lowered her head quickly. Shin Yuming laughed loudly, and the doting in his laughter made Yushu feel sad. Shin Yuming stroked Jiao Jiao's hair gently, turned around and ordered in a cold voice, "Yin Yu, are you free? Go back and mind your own business in the future." Yin Yu's arms, which were holding Yunzi, froze involuntarily. Jilan happened to arrive and took Yunzi away. She said to Shin Yuming expressionlessly, "Shin Yuming, don't regret it." Jilan had been practicing since she was young, so it was no problem for her to pick up Yunzi. Shin Yuming ignored Jilan and cast a warning glance at Yin Yu. Don't make such a stupid mistake next time. When she wakes up, let them leave. Don't make any noise here. Jiao Jiao doesn't like noise. Yinyu nodded in agreement and then disappeared into the darkness. Jilan carefully placed Yunzi on the bed. She had heard from Yushu yesterday about Yunzi's recent experiences, and couldn't help but sigh that Yiming was such a jerk. So he rushed over early in the morning, only to witness a real-life heartbreaker. Yushu hurriedly dragged the Dr. Qianbei back from the clinic, only to find that Yunzi had a slight fever because she caught a cold last night. When Jilan heard this, she was so angry that she kicked the stool next to her away. Oh, miss, why are you doing this? People don't even take your feelings seriously, and you still stay here. Are you waiting to be bullied? While Yushu was feeding Yunzi medicine, she listened to Jilan's words and her eyes turned red. Yunzi slept for a whole day and finally woke up. Qianbei gave her another magic pill, and Yunzi's face regained some color. After drinking a bowl of century-old ginseng soup cooked by Yushu, Yunzi felt warm all over. The next day, Yunzi went to Yiming's courtyard with her homemade breakfast as usual. As soon as she entered the courtyard, she saw Jiao Jiao admiring the flowers in the courtyard. When Jiao Jiao saw Yunzi, she immediately put on a disgusted expression, which was completely different from her appearance in front of Yiming. Yunzi, you are so shameless. Yiming asked you to leave, but you still refuse to leave. Don't think about Yiming anymore. I have his child. Just accept your fate. Jiao Jiao looked at Yunzi as if she had seen something ominous, and tried to avoid her. But Yunzi still looked indifferent. As soon as Yushu entered the room, she saw Jiao Jiao rubbing salt into Yunzi's heart, but Yunzi still looked cold and indifferent. Yushu felt sorry for her young lady and couldn't help but step forward to protect her. You are shameless. My young lady and her husband are obviously doing well, but you insist on interfering. Who is shameless? You even want to drive my young lady away. You are so shameless. Yushu's face turned red with anger. Jiao Jiao was infuriated by her words. Obviously my young lady and her husband are together, so she raised her hand and slapped her. Yunzi's face darkened. Oh, what a pure white lotus. Before she finished her words, with a slap, Yunzi slapped Jiao Jiao in the face. Jiao Jiao was so angry that she jumped to her feet, but she looked up and forced down the fierceness in her eyes, squeezing out a few tears. Sister Yi, Yiming has already had breakfast. I was just kindly reminding you that you don't have to work so hard to make breakfast in the future. Why did you hit him? I was wrong. I apologize. Is that okay? Yunzi knew very well that Yiming must have returned. Sure enough, Yiming soon appeared in front of her, his face terribly gloomy and his voice cold. I understand. If it happens again, I won't let you off easily. Yiming hugged Jiao Jiao. The pain in his eyes was like a sharp blade, piercing Yunzi's heart. Yunzi felt familiar with this scene. Her chest tightened. She met Yiming's gaze stubbornly. You want me to leave? That's easy. I'm your wife. You want me to leave? Yiming's eyes were stern, and every word he said was as sharp as a knife. It's better to go back to your room. Yunzi raised her lips towards Yiming. Only she knew how much pain was hidden in that smile. She pretended to be relaxed and said, It's up to you. I've said it before, I'm always here. Chapter 13, Unbearable. Yunzi glanced at Jiao Jiao, and the provocative look made her disdain him. Jiao Jiao then turned her head and looked at Yiming aggrievedly, tears welling up in her eyes. Yiming, it's okay. Sister Yi didn't mean it. She's already married to you. If you drive her away, she'll have nowhere to go. Yiming lowered his head, looking at Jiao Jiao's slightly swollen face with eyes full of pampering and heartache. Whatever you want, next time you do this, just fight back, understand? Jiao Jiao nodded, and Yiming hugged her and left. Fight back next time, these words kept echoing in Yunzi's mind. Her face was as pale as paper, and she pulled Yushu back to the room. I'll apply some medicine for you. Yushu looked at Yunzi's thin body, feeling very sorry. Yunzi sat in the room, her eyes looking through the window lattice, where she saw the shadows of Yiming and his companions leaning against each other in his room. She laughed at herself and said, Yiming, are you still as cruel as you were in your previous life? Yunzi walked into the study, holding the pharmaceutical book given by Qianbei, and lowered her head to study it, but she was in a state of unrest and the words on the pages seemed to become blurred. The next day, Jiao Jiao came to Yunzi's room with a bowl of soup in her hand. When Yushu saw his face, which had already subsided, her smile suddenly faded. "What are you doing here? My son-in-law is not here. Be careful or I'll kick you out." Jiao Jiao chuckled, a hint of ruthlessness flashed in her eyes. "The little girl is quite arrogant, she must be taught a lesson. I came here specially to apologize. Yu Ming asked me to cook this soup, and I specially brought a bowl for you." Sure enough, Jiao Jiao caught the fleeting fluctuation in Yunzi's eyes, smiled, turned around and left gracefully. Yunzi walked to the table and opened the lid of the soup bowl. A suspicious smell hit her nose. She examined the tonic soup and said in a cold voice, like a spring of ice that had just melted, "This soup is poisonous." After saying that, Yunzi turned and left. Soon, Jilan came into the room, looked at the soup on the table, and asked in confusion, "Yunzi doesn't want to eat again?" Yushu's eyes were red, and she said to Jilan, "Jiao Jiao sent it here, saying that the son-in-law prepared it himself, but the young lady said that drugs were put in it. How could the son-in-law be so cruel? The young lady is still devoted to him." Jilan's face darkened and she glared at Yushu. "Don't cry all the time. Your young lady is counting on you to protect her. Let's go and talk to Jiao Jiao." Jilan picked up Yushu and went to Shenyuming with the soup. Yunzi was reading a book by the window. When she saw this, she knew that she was going to settle the score with Jiao Jiao, so she had to put down the book and follow her. As soon as Jilan entered the room, she saw Shenyuming scooping soup to feed Jiao Jiao. She sneered and slammed the soup down, scaring Jiao Jiao. Shenyuming's face turned pale and he shouted coldly, "Get out, this is not your dormitory, don't be an eyesore here." Jilan glanced at Jiao Jiao, who was in tears, and snorted, "Do you think I want to see you show your affection? If the young lady hadn't asked me to come over, I wouldn't have bothered to step over this threshold. Jiao Jiao, you'd better not touch Yunzi, otherwise I will never forgive you for your little tricks. This time I poisoned her, but I actually underestimated Yunzi, she has seen through these little tricks." Jiao Jiao looked at Shenyuming with tears in her eyes, pitifully, "I didn't. I just want to make peace with Sister Yi." Shenyuming gently stroked Jiao Jiao's back, but his eyes turned cold. "She said she didn't do it, so she didn't do it. If Jiao Jiao wasn't so magnanimous, how could you have the chance to stand here? Don't be ungrateful." Yunzi stood outside the door, sneering. Shenyuming naturally noticed her presence, and his eyes became even colder. Yunzi smiled softly, the coldness in her eyes betraying her feelings. She walked in slowly. "Shenyuming, remember what you said today, don't regret it. This time, Yunzi will fulfill your wish." Somehow, Shenyuming felt a tightness in his heart after hearing this. Yunzi looked straight at Jiao Jiao, her tone calm and calm. "My leaving does not mean that you have won. As long as I find out that he is not doing well, I will never let you live in peace." Jilan looked at Yunzi's appearance with mixed feelings in her heart. She glared at Shenyuming with gritted teeth. "Mr. Shen, you are such a ruthless guy. You have hurt the young lady time and time again. Sooner or later, you will regret it." As she spoke, Jilan pulled out a silver needle and sent it flying towards Jiao Jiao. Jiao Jiao screamed and secretly glared at Jilan fiercely. As soon as Yunzi stepped out of the door, she realized that the atmosphere was not right. "Go back." He Qing naturally sensed it, and pulled Yushu and Yunzi back to the room. Shenyuming protected Jiao Jiao, and Yunzi smiled at herself. Men in black jumped in from all directions. This group of men in black was different from the last time. They were better organized and their martial arts were more advanced. Shenyuming guarded Jiao Jiao, Jilan protected Yushu, and Yunzi used a dagger to neatly deal with an approaching man in black, her cuffs stained with hot blood. More and more people in black gathered, and the few people gradually felt overwhelmed. The battle lasted for a long time, and fatigue gradually spread. Suddenly, Yunzi caught a glimpse of a silver light heading straight for Shenyuming. "Be careful." Yunzi stood in front of Shenyuming without hesitation, watching the soft sword pierce her chest, blood oozing from the corner of her mouth. Yunzi held on, and Jiao Jiao breathed a sigh of relief when she saw this, and hurriedly checked whether Shenyuming was injured. Jilan could no longer hold back, and broke out of the encirclement, crying uncontrollably. Yunzi took out the jade flute from her sleeve, and played it slowly with all her strength until the man in black no longer appeared. Looking at the fallen enemy, Yunzi smiled slightly, and then her eyes went dark and she fainted. Jiao Jiao pulled Shenyuming and watched coldly as Yunzi fell. Jilan's eyes were filled with tears. She said to Yunzi, "Are you stupid? The man doesn't want you anymore, but you still blocked the sword for him." Ching glared at Xinyuming, her eyes full of hatred. "You'd better pray that she is safe, otherwise I will do my best to drag you to be buried with me." Jilan quickly picked up Yunzi and ran back to the room. Qianbei also felt something was wrong and rushed over. When he saw the cold sword stuck in Yunzi's body, he couldn't help but sigh. He used his inner strength to slowly pull out the sword, carefully applied medicine to Yunzi, and then he breathed a sigh of relief. At this time, Qing's carriage had stopped outside the Shen mansion. Jilan planned to take Yunzi away to prevent her from being hurt again. Xinyuming then stepped into the room. Jilan looked at him coldly. Yushu stood in front of Yunzi to protect her. "What else do you want? Our young lady has let go, so you should let her go too. We will leave tonight and won't bother you anymore." Yushu was extremely disgusted with Xinyuming at this moment and disliked everything about him. Xinyuming's eyes swept across Yunzi, and a barely perceptible trace of heartache flashed across his eyes, but it quickly disappeared. "There's no rush. She's not in a good condition to travel. Jiao Jiao said she saved my life, so the Shen family will take good care of her. It won't be too late to leave until she recovers." Jilan looked at Xinyuming, wishing she could dig his heart open to see if he was a heart of stone. Xinyuming glanced at Yunzi again, said nothing more, and turned away. Yunzi woke up slowly 3 days later. She felt unbearable pain in her chest. When she opened her eyes, she saw Yushu busy changing the bandages. Yunzi tried to force a smile. "Why are you here? Who is in charge of Yagu Villa?" Chapter 14, The happy event is ruined. "Miss, I'm fine at home." Yushu saw Yunzi wake up, her eyes reddened. "How did you get so badly injured?" Yunzi smiled comfortingly. "I'm fine, just take a rest, don't worry about me. Give the medicine to Yushu, and you go back to Yagu Villa. If I find that your disciples have not made any progress, I will let you perform in public." Yunzi was joking, but her smile pulled the wound and she grimaced in pain. Yushu's eyes were red. "Miss, don't laugh. The wound will heal in a few days. If you continue like this, I will ignore you." In the past few days, Yushu learned from Yushu everything that happened in the past 2 months. She felt sorry for Yunzi and was displeased with Xinyuming. After some time, Yushu felt relieved when she saw that Yunzi was getting better. Night fell quietly. Yunzi closed her eyes tightly, but tossed and turned and could not fall asleep. Suddenly, a faint humming slipped into her ears, and Yunzi frowned in disdain. Yunzi knew very well that there was no other man in the yard except Xinyuming, and who else could have made such a noise except Jiao Jiao? Yunzi suddenly laughed out loud. This couple was so shameless. She was angry for a long time before she fell into a deep sleep. "Xinyuming, this time, you are free." The next morning, Yushu stepped into Yunzi's room. Yunzi smiled weakly and said to Yushu, "Prepare a carriage, pack up your things, and we will leave today." Yushu was naturally happy with Yunzi's decision, so as to avoid seeing Jiao Jiao's face and making Yunzi unhappy. But she was worried about Yunzi's physical condition. Looking at Yunzi's pale face, Yushu hesitated and said, "Miss, are you sure? You?" Yunzi understood what Yushu was worried about. "I'm fine, I just don't want to stay here anymore. I choose to let Xinyuming go. Let's go to the small bamboo house. Find a chance to tell Xiao Yu, and we'll go there." Yushu nodded with tears in her eyes, feeling full of resentment towards Jiao Jiao. Yushu went out to prepare the carriage. Yunzi forced herself to get up and pack her luggage. She held the bracelet tightly in her hand, rubbing it repeatedly, but finally put it down, put on her cloak, and left resolutely. The two of them boarded the carriage and set off on a long journey. Jiao Jiao looked at Yunzi's lonely back, a sly smile appeared on the corner of her mouth, and she thought, "Yunzi, you are still a little too young to fight with me." Fortunately, she found Xinyuming in time. "Look, even Xinyuming is on my side." Yunzi rented a bamboo house, and as soon as she pushed the door open, she told Yushu, "Go buy some food. Pick whatever you like. Buy some decorations. This house is too empty and deserted." Yushu agreed and busied herself adding charcoal to the stove. She was secretly glad that she was smart enough to buy charcoal earlier. Yunzi was weak and it would be terrible if she caught a cold again. As soon as Yushu left, Yunzi sat down at the desk and flipped through the secret book on alchemy. The long-lost tranquility quietly spread in her heart. Not long after, Qianbei arrived, looked at Yunzi's pale face, and silently transferred his internal energy to her. Yunzi was surprised, and guessed that it was Yushu who tipped off. Looking at the empty land outside the window, Yunzi said to Qianbei, "Bring some medicinal seeds next time. I want to try growing medicinal plants." Qianbei responded and handed her a pot-shaped vessel, purple gold alchemy furnace, specially used for refining medicine. Yunzi was stunned, then took it. Qianbei said nothing, turned around and left. As soon as he left, Yushu came back. Yunzi wrote a prescription and ordered, "Get 5 doses of the best medicine according to the prescription." Yushu took the order and went back quickly. Yunzi slowly used her internal energy. Thanks to Yushu's good medicine, the circulation of her internal energy was no longer difficult. The medicine was put into the purple gold furnace. Yunzi focused on regulating her internal strength. After 2 hours, 5 pills were ready. Yunzi took 1 pill and sealed the rest. After a while, her body recovered. She took Yushu and planted herbs in the yard, busy until dusk. Yunzi wiped her sweat and smiled at Yushu. "Let's go to the market to buy some delicious food. We'll have a big dinner tonight. Isn't Jilan coming back? Call her and we can have a nice meal together." Yunzi smiled sincerely, and her face was no longer pale. Seeing Yunzi's carefree look, Yushu happily responded, "Okay." The two of them rode down the mountain in a carriage. When they arrived at the market, Yushu regretted not checking the almanac before going out. Yunzi looked at Jiao Jiao, her eyes were like a cold pond, without a single ripple. Jiao Jiao met Yunzi's gaze, but found that there was actually some pity in her eyes. Yunzi passed by coldly, as if she didn't know Jiao Jiao at all. Jiao Jiao touched her belly and called out to Yunzi, "Hey, you don't recognize your old friend after only half a month." "Yunzi, I thought you were so capable, but in the end, you were dismissed by Shen Yuming's words." Yunzi didn't respond, but Yushu glared at Jiao Jiao with anger. If that look could hurt people, Jiao Jiao would have turned to ashes long ago. Jiao Jiao didn't care about Yushu's murderous eyes. She chuckled and said to Yunzi, "I have something to tell you. I'm pregnant. Yuming and I have to get married earlier. Remember to come and have a drink at the wedding." After saying this, Yunzi's expression finally changed a little. She turned around, stared at Jiao Jiao coldly, and said coldly, "Don't worry, I will definitely be there for your wedding, but I plan to give you a big gift to ruin your wedding." When Jiao Jiao heard this, she shrank back in fear, fearing that Yunzi would really attack her. Yunzi's eyes were full of sarcasm, and she sneered a few times, as if she was making fun of Jiao Jiao's naivety. Jiao Jiao bit her lower lip and glared at Yunzi fiercely. Yunzi approached Jiao Jiao step by step and said, "So this is all you can do? I thought you were so great, but in the end, I'm still the winner. You better be careful. If I get upset one day, I might come to your house and catch you off guard." Jiao Jiao thought of how Yunzi had used Liu Shang to defeat 10 men in black that day, and her face turned pale. Yunzi ignored Jiao Jiao and started to walk away, but suddenly she heard applause from behind. Shinsayan looked at Yunzi, his eyes flashing with tender love, and walked forward. "Yunzi, it is true that I have a keen eye." Jiao Jiao was quite surprised to see Shinsayan. She didn't expect that he had the leisure time to stroll around. Jiao Jiao quickly calmed down and saluted Shinsayan, "Greetings to the head of the Shen family." Shinsayan nodded slightly, his eyes gently falling on Jiao Jiao. "Don't run around when you're pregnant. If you get a miscarriage or something goes wrong, it will be heartbreaking." Shinsayan's smile was as gentle as the spring breeze, but the severity and warning hidden in his words made Jiao Jiao shiver. She nodded hastily and left with the maid. Shinsayan watched her back, his eyes became sharp again. Yunzi ignored him and walked on her own. The shadow looked at Shinsayan's receding back, then looked at Shen Yuming, who was expressionless in front of him. Shen Yuming was staring at the figure that was getting farther and farther away, and ordered in a deep voice, "Go, light up his house for me, so that he has something to do." The shadow took the order and left. Shen Yuming took a long time to look away, and a trace of imperceptible heartache flashed in his eyes. Shinsayan followed Yunzi to the market. Yunzi couldn't stand this guard following her like a shadow, so she turned around and said coldly, "How much free time does Master Shen have? Following behind a girl, aren't you afraid that she will misunderstand you as a bad person?" Shinsayan smiled without saying anything, his eyes locked on Yunzi. "Who dares not obey me? Besides, have you ever seen such a handsome villain?" Chapter 15 Don't Care. Yunzi just looked at Shinsayan, and he was about to say something. At this time, someone whispered something in Shinsayan's ear, and his face became even uglier. Shinsayan turned to Yunzi and suddenly smiled meaningfully. Yunzi, my door is always open to you. As long as you are willing, I welcome you anytime. As soon as he finished speaking, Shinsayan turned and left, leaving behind a changing situation. As soon as Jiaojia returned home, her legs started shaking involuntarily. As soon as Shinsayan entered the room, she rushed over and hugged him tightly. Shinyuming patted her back gently. Although his voice was gentle, it lacked the doting tone of the past. What's wrong? Listening carefully, the doting tone had become as light as water. Jiaojia's face was pale. She shook her head, her voice trembling slightly. No. It's okay, maybe I was just tired. Shinyuming nodded slightly and helped her sit down on the bed. Then you take a nap first, I have something else to do, so I won't be back for dinner tonight. Jiaojia's mind was full of Shinsayan's words. She didn't pay any attention to what Shinyuming said. She just nodded woodenly. As soon as Shinyuming left the house, the shadow immediately followed him, still maintaining a respectful look. Young master, we found him. He is at the border. We have sent people over. Shinyuming nodded slightly, his cold eyes revealing a piercing chill. Get ready, the emperor will go hunting in the West Mountain tomorrow. The shadow took the order and immediately turned and left. Shinyuming gazed into the distance and swore in his heart, Mother, you have endured for so many years, I will definitely avenge you. The next day, Yunzi felt her eyelids twitching and had an inexplicable premonition in her heart, as if something big was about to happen. She was uneasy all day. Yushu came in with a basket of vegetables, eager to share the latest gossip from the market with Yunzi. Miss, I heard that the emperor accidentally fell off a cliff while hunting today, and he hasn't been found yet. Yunzi frowned. How could such a cautious person like the emperor fall off the cliff? Obviously, there must be something fishy behind this. A thought suddenly flashed through Yunzi's mind. Could it be him? Shinmanshin. Stay away from her. Shinyuming's eyes were full of warnings, but Shinsayan laughed and leaned back in his chair. Don't forget, you pushed her away with your own hands. Shinyuming glared at Shinsayan, emitting an aura that kept strangers away, and gnashed his teeth and said, You try. When he thought of Yunzi, Shinsayan's expression softened and he smiled. Shinyuming stared at him gloomily, but Shinsayan was not affected at all, his mind was full of Yunzi's shadow. Then let's see, who will Xiao Yunzi choose? A man who breaks her heart, or a man who truly treats her well? The answer is self-evident. Shinsayan looked at Shinyuming with a teasing look, while the latter's face was as gloomy as water. He glared at him without saying a word, then turned away angrily. Shinsayan leaned back in his chair leisurely, looking around at this beautiful house, but he did not feel the slightest joy in his heart. To him, this house was more like an unforgettable nightmare. Shinyuming returned to the Shin mansion with a rage in his heart, and his face was extremely ugly. Yinyu noticed Shinyuming's murderous gaze and wisely chose to avoid it to avoid being harmed for no reason. Shinyuming sat heavily on the chair, pressing his swollen and aching temple. Whenever he thought of Yunzi, his head hurt more and more. Shinsayan's previous words undoubtedly hit his soft spot, and he began to close his eyes and rest. Then he stood up and walked towards the small bamboo house. In the distance, he quietly looked at Yunzi's peaceful sleeping face, the candlelight dancing on her face, creating an indescribable softness. Yunzi's eyelashes trembled slightly. She was not really asleep. She could keenly feel the changes in the surrounding aura. Obviously, someone was nearby. Could it be him? Yunzi's heartstrings were gently plucked. However, Shinsayan suddenly turned and left, as if whispering, Little thing, wait for me, I will take you home soon. When Yunzi opened her eyes, she felt that the aura around her had returned to normal. This night was destined to be a sleepless night for her and Shinyuming. The next morning, 3 carriages stopped in front of the small bamboo house. Yushu saw this scene as soon as she woke up and hurried to tell Yunzi. Yunzi walked out of the house and saw a man who looked like a servant standing respectfully in front of the carriage. He came forward and said respectfully, Madam, the young master sent me to take you back to the mansion. Please come with us. Yunzi nodded silently, and got on the carriage without saying anything more. She knew very well that it was better to make the best of it. After arriving at the Shin mansion, the servant led Yunzi to Shinsayan's study. As soon as she entered the door, she saw Shinyuming standing upright, and a trace of bitterness surged in her heart. She turned her head to look at Shinsayan and saluted without being humble or arrogant. Shinsayan keenly caught the bitterness in Yunzi's eyes, and also noticed the pain in Yunzi's eyes when he looked at Yunzi. Yunzi, Shinsayan said with a wicked smile, how have you been recently? I haven't had time to see you, how did you become so thin? Yunzi still looked cold and said, I've been fine lately, but you, Master Shin, must be very busy, right? What's the matter with sending someone to see me? Shinsayan had long been accustomed to Yunzi's cold attitude. He smiled and responded, I don't feel tired. It's worth it to get your care, Yunzi. Before he finished speaking, Shinsayan felt a burning gaze that seemed to burn a hole in his body, but he didn't care and continued to say to Yunzi. Yunzi, my wife's throne is still vacant. Do you want to consider divorce? After saying that, he glanced at Shinyuming provocatively, as if to say, Yunzi will definitely choose me. He just wanted to make Shinyuming angry to death. Shinyuming stood aside, his hands clenched into fists, looking like he was ready to take action at any moment. Shinsayan looked at Yunzi leisurely, waiting for her answer. Yunzi suddenly remembered the unusual atmosphere last night, and kept an eye on Shinyuming. Shinyuming seemed to have noticed something, and the expression on his face returned to its previous indifference. Yunzi looked at Shinyuming's indifferent look and remembered that he was the same in her previous life. What a scum. When Shinsayan saw this, his pupils shrank slightly. Yunzi was really pitiful like this. Shinyuming looked at Yunzi's body full of wounds, resisted the urge to move forward, and suppressed the anger in his heart. When Yunzi looked at Shinsayan again, her eyes were firm and clear, and she said slowly, I'll think about it. As soon as she finished speaking, Yunzi turned and left. Shinsayan did not mind her departure. After all, if she was not so arrogant, she would not be Yunzi. Chapter 16 Special Period. Shinsayan stayed in the bamboo house to eat. The meal was peaceful. Jilan was not interested in watching Yunzi and Shinsayan show their affection, so she dragged Yushu and went for a stroll in the night market. Shinsayan followed Yunzi, and the two of them took a leisurely walk. Passing by a rouge shop, I saw Yushu excitedly pulling Jilan to study the watercolors. Shinsayan took Yunzi to the lipstick counter and asked lovingly, which one do you like? Yunzi smiled back and turned to look at Shinsayan. Her bright eyes seemed to be able to captivate people. Shinsayan felt an inexplicable heat rising in his body. He suppressed the impulse and turned to continue looking at the lipstick. Shinsayan was afraid that if he looked at her a few more times, he couldn't help but want to give her a romantic surprise here. Seeing Shinsayan examining the lipstick seriously, Yunzi said slowly, Shinsayan, help me choose one. Upon hearing this, Shinsayan glanced at the lipsticks with a confused look on his face, muttering to himself, aren't they all the same? If Yunzi knew what Shinsayan was thinking at this moment, she would probably be so angry that she would vomit blood. Shinsayan picked and chose in the cabinet, and finally took one and handed it to Yunzi. I think this one is beautiful. When Yunzi saw this, 3 black lines appeared on her forehead. Yushu had been paying attention to this side for a long time. When she came over with Jilan, she found the lipstick in Shinsayan's hand. Jilan couldn't hold back and burst out laughing. Yunzi looked at Shinsayan helplessly. The latter frowned and looked confused. Yunzi looked at the color of the lipstick and said helplessly, Shinsayan, this is Death Baby Pink. If I put it on, I'm afraid I'll be as dark as a coal ball. Do you believe it? Shinsayan became even more confused. Jilan looked at him and laughed until she was out of breath. Even the guy in the rouge shop couldn't help but turn his back and laugh. Shinsayan couldn't hold back his pride, so he responded domineeringly, if I say it's beautiful, then it's beautiful. Jilan almost got a stitch in her side from laughing. Shinsayan's face darkened and he turned to the clerk and ordered, bring 1 lipstick of each color you have here and take it away. Jilan finally stopped laughing, but the tears in her eyes revealed her loss of control. She gave Yunzi a thumbs up and thought, the boss's move is indeed extraordinary. Yunzi couldn't help but smile bitterly, Shinsayan, there are so many lipsticks, it will take me forever to use them all. Can we take fewer? I'll just pick a few that I like. Yunzi was actually worried about the money, but Shinsayan added to the happy shop assistant, the same goes for rouge, 1 box of each. When the clerk heard this, he thought it was the arrival of the god of wealth, and he hurried to report to his boss, thinking that his bonus for this month was secure. Yunzi shut up tactfully, fearing that this gentleman would really empty the entire rouge shop. Jilan also twitched her lips, which was rare, and said jokingly, you guys continue to be sweet, Yushu and I have something to do, so we'll leave first. Seeing this, Yushu also followed Jilan and escaped. Yunzi looked at Shinsayan's face, which was darker than Baogong's, and quickly smiled apologetically. Shinsayan, you are so handsome, smile a little, don't let people misunderstand that I am bullying you. As he spoke, while no one was paying attention, Shinsayan rubbed Yunzi's face, which also made him feel better. The two left the rouge shop and were on their way home. Yunzi looked at the pile of lipsticks and felt worried. She was thinking about asking Yushu to accompany her to set up a stall to deal with them tomorrow. Suddenly, a handsome man appeared in front of Yunzi and respectfully called out, "Master." Yunzi was startled and looked at Yunhan warily. Yunhan explained helplessly, "Master, I am Yunhan. Today my internal strength has improved and I can push down the tree." Only when Yunzi saw that Yunhan could knock down a big tree did she become certain that this guy was so evil. However, he was still a little inferior to Shinsayan. Facing this handsome man, Yunzi felt a little depressed. She asked Yunhan in a low voice, "Do you know where I can find such a good subordinate?" Yunhan looked at Yunzi tenderly and replied, "Twilight Tower, the master can go there and take a look." The Dusk Tower might scare others, but in Yunhan's eyes, it is a piece of cake. Yunzi was extremely excited and hurried to find Shinsayan. As soon as he entered the study, Yunzi asked him with a smile, "Shinsayan, have you heard of Dusk Tower?" Shinsayan nodded, and Yunzi said with a smile, "I want a good starter, like Yunhan." At the end of her speech, Yunzi acted as if she was aggrieved, which made Shinsayan feel so distressed that he couldn't help but touch her head. "Okay, we can go whenever you want. I'll accompany you, but you have to promise me that you'll be obedient. Twilight Tower is quite dangerous, don't you know?" Shinsayan had long wanted to recruit subordinates, but he just hadn't found the time. Now he could kill two birds with one stone. As soon as day broke, Yunzi took Yushu to find Jilan, smiling cunningly. Jilan was a little dizzy at the smile in the morning. "It's so early in the morning, can you stop being so attractive? What do you want from me? I don't believe you're here for a morning chat." Yunzi smiled shyly and said, "I have to go to the Twilight Tower. I'll ask you to take care of Yushu for a few days. I'm worried about her being alone in the Shin mansion." Jilan looked at Yunzi and nodded. "Is Master Shin going to accompany you?" "Miss, you want to go to Twilight Tower alone. I advise you to forget it. Don't let Yushu stay at my place for free meals and refuse to leave." Yunzi scratched her head sheepishly and smiled, "You can afford it anyway, I'll treat you to a big meal later." Jilan was obviously not interested in this meal and sneered, "Miss, please go quickly." Yunzi blinked, smiled, got on the carriage, and galloped away. After leaving the city gate, Shinsayan pulled Yunzi out of the car and said, "Yunhan, come out." Yunzi was confused, but she didn't ask. Shinsayan glanced at Yunhan in human form and frowned slightly. This guy was too cute, and he might seduce Yunzi away. Yunzi looked at Shinsayan with confusion on her face, only to see that his face was so gloomy that it could drip water. Yunzi thought, why does this guy's mood change like turning over a book? Could it be that he is in a special period of mood? Shinsayan ordered in a deep voice, "Send us to Dusk Tower." Yunhan nodded in response and made way for the carriage to pass. Looking at the huge Yunhan, Yunzi's eyes lit up and she praised Shinsayan, "Super cool." Shinsayan's face darkened a little, and he pulled Yunzi up and flew into the air. Lian Yunhan followed suit. Yunzi was so excited that she danced with joy. "Yunhan is so handsome." Seeing Yunzi's fangirl look, Shinsayan stroked his face, his eyes flashing with danger. He narrowed his eyes, and the danger signal flashed in his eyes, "Handsome. More handsome than me." Yunzi suddenly became smart and leaned close to Shinsayan, saying sweetly, "You are the most handsome, no one can beat you." Shinsayan's expression finally eased a little. Yunzi secretly complained that this guy was really jealous and his sourness was too high. Chapter 17 Unimpeded. Yunhan quickly sent the two to the edge of the Dusk Tower. The sun was shining, and the forest was colorful. Yunzi thought to herself that this Dusk Tower didn't seem as scary as the legend said. Yunzi strode into the forest with big strides, and Shinsayan followed closely behind her, holding Yunzi in his arms. Yunhan followed behind, walking vigilantly at the back and listening carefully to everything around him. Going deeper into the forest, Yunzi was puzzled. The road was smooth and there was not even a trace of a spiritual beast. Shinsayan glanced at Yunhan and ordered, "You go back first." Yunhan responded, reminded him to be careful, looked at Shinsayan meaningfully, and then left. Shinsayan held Yunzi in his arms and walked slowly closer with a cold look in his eyes. Lian Xiangzi saw this scene and couldn't help but sneer. He wanted to collect such a low-level spiritual beast. Yunzi naturally noticed the laughter and asked sternly, "Who's there?" Lian Xiangzi was stunned. She didn't expect that Yunzi would notice her just by laughing. It seems that the people around Shinsayan should not be underestimated. Lian Xiangzi simply jumped down from the tree carelessly. Since he had been discovered, there was no point in hiding. She looked at Yunzi with her head held high, her eyes revealing undisguised disdain. Suddenly, Lian Xiangzi drew out the long sword from his waist and rushed towards Yunzi. Shinsayan was well prepared and started fighting with Lian Xiangzi with Yunzi. Lian Xiangzi curled up the corner of his mouth in a sneer, his eyes became increasingly cold and full of provocation. She held the sword with both hands and attacked Yunzi fiercely. Yunzi only felt the sound of weapons colliding continuously, and she was tossed in Shinsayan's arms, her stomach churning. Suddenly, Yunzi felt a heat on her face, and when she looked, she saw that Shinsayan's white clothes were stained with blood. She hurriedly took out the medicine powder and applied it on his wound. Looking up at Lian Xiangzi, with the arrow shining in her hand ready to be fired, Yunzi struck Lian Xiangzi with a palm. Lian Xiangzi felt as if she was pierced by a rain of arrows, her chest was burning, and blood was oozing from the corners of her mouth. She glanced at Yunzi coldly and threatened with a snort, "Next time, don't even think about leaving alive." After that, she disappeared like smoke. Yunzi turned her head, her eyes full of worry and distress for Shinsayan. "Let's find a place to rest, I'll treat your injury." Shinsayan smiled gently and responded easily, "It's okay, it's just a minor injury, don't worry." Yunzi ignored his stubbornness and dragged him deeper into the forest to find a shelter, such as a cave. Suddenly, a small wooden house came into view. Yunzi was delighted and pulled Shinsayan and ran towards it. She knocked on the door, but no one answered. She did this several times. Yunzi tried to push the door, but it seemed to be nailed in place. She pushed with all her might but it wouldn't budge. Suddenly, a warm yellow light shone through the wooden house, the door slowly opened, and the candles in the house lit up. Yunzi was on guard. Shinsayan frowned, his face slightly pale. Yunzi glanced at him, gritted her teeth, and pulled Shinsayan into their house. There shouldn't be any danger in such a small house, right? As soon as he entered the house, the door closed automatically. Shinsayan looked inside the house with a frown on his face, and explained, "This is the army. It is said that there are countless magical weapons hidden inside, but no one knows the key to open it. And it will only appear once and then disappear. I thought it was just a rumor before, but I didn't expect it to be true." After Shinsayan said this, Yunzi felt relieved and began to look around the house carefully. Before she knew it, the house was full of weapons. Yunzi felt that she had to find something to protect herself. She couldn't always rely on Shinsayan to protect her. It was too much of a burden to him. She looked around and took the Xianming divine whip. After all, it was more convenient to use the whip. Yunzi carefully cleaned Shinsayan's wound, sprinkled medicine powder on it, and bandaged it. She stared at Shinsayan and asked distressedly, "Does it hurt?" As soon as Shinsayan raised his eyes, he fell into Yunzi's captivating eyes. He waved his hand, and Yunzi immediately sat on his lap obediently. Shinsayan sniffed Yunzi's unique fragrance, touching the softest part of his heart. "Oh, it's just a small thing, no big deal." Shinsayan waved his hands carelessly. When he was practicing martial arts in the past, he often got bruises on his body. Yunzi pressed herself against Shinsayan's chest, avoiding his wounds, and said in a muffled voice, "Don't tie me to your belt all the time in the future. I can do it myself. What if you're not around one day? What should I do?" After hearing this, Shinsayan patted Yunzi's head gently and smiled dotingly. "Well, when I'm here, you don't have to worry about anything. I'll protect my people." Yunzi felt so warm in her heart. She turned her head to look at Shinsayan, the corners of her mouth unconsciously raised, full of happiness and pride. Just as they were enjoying themselves, a noise interrupted their warmth. Yunzi shivered, but Shinsayan smiled calmly and embraced Yunzi, smiling, "Wait for me here obediently, don't go anywhere, I'll be back soon." Yunzi's eyes were firm. "No, I want to go with you." Shinsayan thought about it, nodded, and the two flew out of the army. Following the sound, they came to a cliff. Under the moonlight, a lone figure stood on the cliff and howled, with an imposing manner. Shinsayan's eyes sparkled with interest. Shinsayan hugged Yunzi and walked to the edge of the cliff, placing her on a flat surface. Be good and wait for me to come back. Shinsayan hugged Yunzi and smiled dotingly. It's time for us to go home. Yunzi held the magic whip and smiled like a little kid who got candy. She was so happy. Just as she was having fun, a dart came flying towards her. Yunzi dodged quickly and the dart flew past her ear, pulling out a few strands of her hair. Shinsayan's face darkened, his eyes fixed on the proud Lian Xiangzi on the treetop not far away, and he teleported over and punched her. Lian Xiangzi was hit by Shinsayan's punch just as she reacted, and her face turned ugly. The female warrior who had always been invincible was defeated in front of him. Lian Xiangzi glanced at Shinsayan, still with a proud smile on her face, but her voice became colder. It's quite interesting, you too, I'll remember it, next time. You won't have this chance next time. Shinsayan took Yunzi and flew forward using his internal energy, and disappeared without a trace in the blink of an eye. Lian Xiangzi bit her lip and punched the old tree next to her. The trunk broke with a snap. As night fell, Lian Xiangzi jumped up and disappeared into the depths of the forest. Before the sun reached overhead, Shinsayan and Yunzi had already strode into the courtyard of the Shen mansion. Yunzi glanced at Shinsayan, pouted her lips, and turned to look for Jilan with a smile. At this time, He Qing flashed out from the room, bowed his head and said respectfully, "There is a secret letter from the palace, asking you and Miss Yi to come to the palace for dinner tomorrow to discuss border affairs." Shinsayan nodded slightly and stood with his hands behind his back. He exuded an unruly aura of a king. The sunlight shone on him, making him look like a superstar on the stage, shining brightly. Chapter 18, Get Away. The next morning, Yunzi was still asleep when Shinsayan half coaxed and half dragged her to the emperor's palace. At breakfast time, Yunzi was alone facing a table full of delicious food, but she found the food tasteless. The two bosses had already gone into the study, leaving her yawning alone. As soon as the emperor sat down, he threw an urgent letter in front of Shinsayan. Shinsayan glanced at it and saw that the letter contained news that Jiufeng country had invaded the border Kandan. He looked indifferent and responded in a cold tone, "I don't care about this matter." The emperor had anticipated this, and he sat in the chair with a lazy posture but exuding royal nobility. "This country is your father's life's work. Can you bear to watch it disappear bit by bit after his death?" When talking about his father, Shinsayan's eyes flickered slightly, but the emperor obviously underestimated him. Shinsayan raised a faint smile and sat on the chair in a rude manner. "Do you think you can convince me like this? My father guarded it for his entire life, but he couldn't do it in the end. It seems that the soldiers under your command are not that strong." The emperor's eyes gradually turned cold, and he looked directly at Shinsayan. "What do you want? The border is your father's world. As the son of General Shen, you can boost morale by taking action." Shinsayan raised his eyes slightly and looked at the emperor, his tone full of casualness and laxity. "So? I have to go." The emperor glanced at Shinsayan and said through his teeth, "So what do you mean?" "Simple, stop trying to hit on her, that's my condition." The emperor sneered after hearing this, his eyes full of disdain. "You don't even have the courage to compete with me. You use this to threaten me, what kind of hero are you?" Shinsayan held the teacup, his eyes seemingly wandering nonchalantly around the rim of the cup. His calmness made the emperor grit his teeth even more. The emperor had just ascended the throne and was unable to handle many things. There were many opponents who wanted to pull him off the throne, and he dared not entrust anyone except Shinsayan to guard such a critical position on the frontier. The emperor suddenly had an idea, and he leaned back in his chair leisurely, saying, "There are still things left by your father on the border. Can you really bear to let them fall into the hands of the Jiufeng people?" Shinsayan's handsome face was suddenly covered with gloom. His father had spent his entire life guarding the frontier, fighting wits and courage with the Jiufeng kingdom. If the relics were taken away by them, it would be a great shame and humiliation. Shinsayan would never allow such a thing to happen. Shinsayan stared at the emperor fiercely for a long time before he slowly said, "I promise you, but Yunzi has to go with me." Looking at the compromising Shinsayan, a gleam of success flashed in the emperor's eyes. As soon as Shinsayan left, he took Yunzi's hand and left in a hurry. The emperor looked at the empty dining table, feeling it was deserted, and ordered someone to clean it up. After returning to the residence, Yunzi saw that Shinsayan had a stern face and frowned. She wanted to ask but didn't dare to, for fear of touching off Shinsayan's powder keg. Shinsayan gently embraced Yunzi in his arms, sniffing the reassuring scent on her body, and slowly said, We are going to the border in a few days, are you willing to go with me? Yunzi nodded, snuggled in his arms, and listened to the strong heartbeat. 2 days later, Shinsayan wore armor and led Yunzi out. Yunzi prepared several sets of tights for herself to move in, as long robes with large sleeves were not practical for such occasions. When the two arrived at the court, the emperor was already sitting on the dragon throne. Upon seeing them coming, he said in a deep voice, "Now, the Jiufeng kingdom has invaded our country's Khandan border, intending to encroach on our territory. I now appoint Shinsayan as the commander-in-chief, Feng Xiangyu as the deputy commander-in-chief, and Yunzi as the military advisor, and lead 300,000 troops to the border to defend our homeland." The eunuch presented the commander's seal at the right time, and Shinsayan took it expressionlessly. The group then moved to the city wall. Yunzi looked down at the huge crowd below, feeling as if a stone was pressing down on her heart. She had never expected that she would suddenly become a female military strategist. The emperor stood on the top of the city wall, and his calm voice resounded in all directions. "Today, General Shen led his people to defend our territory. Jiufeng dared to covet our Ranchi dynasty. We swear to defeat it, recover the lost territory, and demonstrate the majesty of our dynasty." His words were like a gentle spring breeze, and his firmness and confidence were evident in his words. Even Yunzi felt confident after hearing them, and felt that victory was already in her grasp. Recover the lost territory and enhance our national prestige. Amir Jiufeng, don't even think about getting away with it. I don't know who started shouting it first, but this passionate slogan quickly spread throughout the city, and the spark of patriotism quietly took root in everyone's heart. After the ceremony, Shinsayan rode a white horse slowly out of the city, Feng Xiangyu on the left, and Yunzi in white on the right. The group galloped to Bianyin city. Seeing the 9 phoenix flag flying over Khandan, Shinsayan said in a calm voice, "Pass on the order. The troops will camp in Bianyin city. Another 100,000 troops will be stationed on the plain 15 kilometers away from Khandan. Within a quarter of an hour, I want a detailed topographic map and intelligence on the enemy's generals." The order was loud and clear and could not be challenged, so everyone had no choice but to obey. Shinsayan stared at the unfolded topographic map. In front of him was a vast desert, and Khandan was the pearl in the oasis. Yunzi changed into a tight combat uniform and tied her long hair into a neat ponytail, looking capable and smart. Shinsayan raised his eyes. Yunzi's new outfit made his throat tighten, and his heart felt inexplicably hot. He looked at Yunzi with a gloomy expression. An indescribable fire rose in his belly. He couldn't help but lower his head to capture those tempting red lips. After some tenderness, Shinsayan stared at Yunzi with a fiery gaze. The fire of desire in his belly intensified, and he asked coldly, "Who allowed you to wear this?" Yunzi felt extremely comfortable in this outfit, as if she had regained the lightness she had when performing missions, no longer constrained by complicated clothing. She was concentrating on the map and didn't notice Shinsayan's forbearing expression. "That's good. Do you want me to wear a skirt to the battlefield and hold everyone back? This is not my style." Although Yunzi's words made sense, Shinsayan refused to buy it and gritted his teeth and said, "Change it back. You can only wear it like this when you need it." Yunzi ignored Shinsayan's subtle expression, pointed at Khandan, and said bluntly, "We must fight quickly and take Khandan. There is plenty of water there. If we delay for too long, not only will morale drop to the bottom, but the brothers will also become thirsty." Shinsayan nodded silently, with a hint of approval in his eyes. "Hey, this little girl also has her own way of marching and fighting?" He leisurely held Yunzi on his knees, and played with the hair by her ears with his fingertips. "I never knew my wife is a hidden military expert, ho." The ending tone was long and magnetic, with a gentleness that made Yunzi feel itchy inside. Yunzi's body softened and she collapsed in his arms, muttering to herself, "This guy is such a troublesome goblin." Shinsayan looked at the blood-red sunset in the sky. A smile appeared on his lips. "Madam, do you think we will be safe tonight?" Chapter 19. I have a plan. Yunzi casually flipped through the information on the table. Hu Te Hao? The one from Huahot grassland. According to the information, this is Jiufeng's general, who is good at desert warfare. He once defeated an army of tens of thousands with only 2,000 soldiers. He is cunning and conceited. Yunzi put down the information. Her eyes flickered slightly, as if she had some plan. She smiled and said nothing. As night fell, Yunzi returned to her room after dinner. Shinsayan, under the banner of protection, swaggered into Yunzi's room. Yunzi stroked a small homemade bag at her waist, which contained silver needles, medicines, and a secret weapon specially made for this operation. There was a cunning smile on the corner of her mouth. In the candlelight, she was like a clever fox, cunning and charming, easily moving people's hearts. After finishing his work, Shinsayan stood up and suddenly heard a subtle sound. He smiled mysteriously and walked towards the bed in the inner room. At this time, Yunzi had changed back into casual clothes and looked at Shinsayan with a cunning smile. When Shinsayan saw her, all his fatigue disappeared instantly. "Why are you hiding? Show yourself," Yunzi said jokingly. Shinsayan was not surprised to see Lian Xiangzi, dressed in black, jumping down from the roof. "Oh, the daughter of General Hu Teihao is indeed extraordinary." She sneaked into the Shincamp and looked so leisurely. "Do you think you are a hero?" Yunzi changed the subject and stared at Lian Xiangzi with her phoenix eyes flashing with cold light. The coldness and ruthlessness in her eyes made Shinsayan's heart tremble. "This little guy is so cute and powerful." Lian Xiangzi sneered disdainfully, drew her sword and rushed towards Yunzi, who then wielded the Shenming whip. The two clashed, sparks flying everywhere. Lian Xiangzi smiled contemptuously, thinking that a mere whip could defeat her sword, until she heard a crisp, ding-dong sound and her face suddenly changed. Yunzi caught the subtle change in Lian Xiangzi's expression and sneered, "Get out of here soon, or you won't be able to leave standing." Shinsayan looked at Yunzi's tall and straight back, a smile appearing on the corner of his mouth. This kind of backbone and courage were indeed his cup of tea. She was cut from the same mold as him. Lian Xiangzi glared at Yunzi fiercely. In the backlight, Yunzi stood tall and straight, emitting an indomitable aura. Although she was unwilling, she could only leave in anger. "Yunzi, we'll see." Yunzi turned to face Shinsayan, her eyes softened again. "Shinsayan, tomorrow morning we will attack Kandan and take it down in one fell swoop." Shinsayan ordered in a deep voice, "Send a message to General Phone, attack the city at Yunhour, don't come back to see me if you can't take it." Yunzi looked at Shinsayan with seductive eyes and said in a tender voice, "Master, aren't you afraid that I will embarrass you by making such a fuss?" Shinsayan was amused by Yunzi's cunning appearance and said with a smile, You are still a little naive." Before he finished speaking, he pulled Yunzi into his arms, and the room was suddenly filled with the atmosphere of spring. The next day, Yunzi and Shinsayan stood side by side at the foot of Kandan city, looking at the defenseless city. Yunzi smiled calmly, knowing what was going on. Hu Teihao wanted to take the opportunity to humiliate Shinsayan, but he underestimated the tenacity of the man next to him. Shinsayan witnessed the soldiers pouring into the city gate like a tide. His face remained calm, and he hid his achievements and fame. Shinsayan waved his hand lightly, and Suonan, who was hiding in the sand pile, felt his heart sink. He jumped out swiftly and disappeared. After those lurking men in black were exposed, Shinsayan's image in the eyes of the soldiers became even more legendary. Feng Xiongyu swept his cold eyes across the fallen enemies, and then glanced at Yunzi, who was smiling faintly beside Shinsayan. This glance caused ripples in his heart. When Hu Teihao received the report from his subordinates, he was so furious that the air around him seemed to have frozen. He slapped the table hard, and it broke into pieces. Then he slapped his kneeling subordinate, and Lian Xiangzi, who was standing next to him, had a murderous look in her eyes. Suonan knelt on the ground, motionless, and endured Hu Thao's angry kick, but still stood straight. Hu Teihao spat and cursed, incompetent. He originally planned to lend Kandan to Shinsayan as a warning, but unexpectedly he was tricked instead. In Shin's military camp, Shinsayan was concentrating on studying the terrain. At this time, a soldier came running to report. "General." The soldier stood at attention and saluted. Shinsayan raised his chin and signaled the soldier to continue. The soldier straightened his back and said, "General, the spies we sent out have not returned yet and have not found the enemy camp yet." Shinsayan nodded, not surprised. The most cunning thing about Hu Teihao was the secretive military camp that was good at desert camouflage. Shinsayan suddenly turned around and looked at Yunzi, his tone gentle, "My little military advisor, what do you think?" Yunzi blushed at being addressed like this and glared at Shinsayan coquettishly. Shinsayan's mouth curled up, and Yunzi quickly entered the thinking mode and asked back, "General, you are very wise, and your thoughts and ideas are the same as Yunzi's, aren't they?" Feng Xiongyu, who was standing aside, stared at Yunzi and his heart skipped a beat. Shinsayan smiled and said, "Tonight we will raid Jiufeng border town. We just need to launch rockets to lure out Hu Teihao. Feng Xiongyu was surprised, and seeing Yunzi's calm face, he admired her even more. Since ancient times, there have been few brave women on the battlefield, but in Feng Xionyu's opinion, Yunzi's wisdom and strategy were so rare, as if everything was under control. Feng Xiongyu turned around without saying a word and went to arrange the rocket launch. Yunzi looked at Feng Xionyu's receding back, and the heroic appearance of Feng Xiaoyu emerged in her mind. The two siblings really looked alike. Thinking of Feng Xiaoyu, Yunzi couldn't help but smile. Seeing this, Shinsayan took Yunzi's head in his big hand and pressed it against his chest, with a little jealousy in his voice. "Why are you looking at other handsome guys in front of me? My dear, is it because I haven't taught you a lesson for too long? Are you itching for it?" Shinsayan's last was full of warning. Yunzi couldn't help but chuckle when she heard the sour tone. Shinsayan carried Yunzi directly back to the bedroom, lowered his head and took a deep breath of her fragrance. After a passionate embrace, Shinsayan hugged Yunzi and looked at her jade-like skin. He felt restless again in his heart, but he held back, unwilling to let his beloved little baby suffer any grievances. Yunzi had no idea what Shinsayan was thinking. She looked up at him with her eyes moving and her cheeks flushed, like an alluring little fox. Shinsayan closed his eyes, not daring to look at Yunzi anymore, fearing that he would lose control the next moment. He earnestly reminded her, "I'm not here these few days, wait until I come back to talk to you, don't force yourself, okay? When I'm not around, you have to behave yourself. If I find out that you're looking at other men again, I'll kill that man." Shinsayan said this with gritted teeth, obviously still upset about the scene where Yunzi looked at Feng Xiongyu. Yunzi closed her eyes and lay on Shinsayan, enjoying this warm time that belonged only to them. Chapter 20, Tit-for-Tat Opponents. "Shinsayan, please be careful. Hu Taihao is an old fox and it's not easy to deal with him. Don't get hurt." Yunzi looked at Shinsayan with concern. Shinsayan was a little surprised that the little thing could guess his plan. They really were in tune with each other. At night, Feng Xiongyu led his team to approach the border town quietly. When the time came, he waved his hand, and thousands of arrows were fired, and the border town was instantly ablaze. Feng Xiongyu counted silently in his mind. According to Shinsayan's plan, someone would leave the city within a quarter of an hour, and what he had to do was to lead his men back to the camp safely. As expected, in less than a quarter of an hour, men on horseback came galloping out. Feng Xiongyu was truly impressed by Shinsayan's accurate prediction. He had heard of Hu Taihao, but never thought that one day he would become a fierce opponent. Feng Xiongyu retreated back to the camp and saw Yunzi sitting leisurely. He smiled at him and said, "Thank you for your hard work." Feng Xiongyu gave a standard military salute and replied with a smile, "Of course not, this is my job." Seeing that the time was almost up, Yunzi instructed Feng Xiongyu, "Notify the people in the city to evacuate, and the troops should also be ready to go, so that we won't be caught off guard when the enemy arrives." Yunzi smiled calmly. Feng Xiongyu admired her calmness and generosity even more. She did not act coyly like a delicate lady, nor did she pretend to be weak. She was just tenacious and real. Yunzi smiled firmly. She couldn't embarrass Shinsayan no matter what, right? As the sky began to turn pale, Yunzi suddenly opened her eyes full of determination and confidence. The critical moment had arrived. Feng Xiongyu walked into his room with a sword in his hand. He was not stupid. He understood what she meant when she gave him a slight hint last night. The two of them hid on the city wall, looking at the bustling crowd below, with a smile on Yunzi's lips. Yunzi noticed the unusual movement in the desert and said to Feng Xiongyu, "If they want to play, we should play with them to the end. Take a team to go behind them and catch them off guard. Remember, try to capture them alive if you can." After saying that, Yunzi disappeared into the night in black. Feng Xiongyu looked in the direction where she disappeared. A smile appeared on the corner of his mouth, and his eyes revealed a reluctance that he himself did not even notice. Under the city wall, Suonan and Lian Xiangzi looked at the unusually peaceful Kandam city, and Suonan felt vaguely uneasy. Suddenly, Suonan's ears moved and he turned his head to see Feng Xiongyu and his troops standing beside him. Suonan's face darkened, as he had not noticed anything at all. Feng Xiongyu stared coldly at the man crawling out of the sand, pointed his sword at Suonan, and slashed down with it. Lian Xiangzi was quick-witted and quick-handed, and with a flash of sword light, he rushed forward. In less than a quarter of an hour, Suonan felt something was wrong. His men fell one after another, without any of their former bravery. He grabbed Lian Xiangzi tightly and said, "Don't bother, retreat quickly." Feng Yangyu glanced at the people who were lying in a coma and curled his lips. He should thank Yunzi for her preparation before leaving. Lian Xiangzi was able to escape only because she wore a mask. He looked at the person lying on the ground and gave an order, "Carry him in, don't kill him." Yunzi hid in the dark, her eyes swept over Suonan and Lian Xiangzi. An evil smile appeared at the corner of her mouth, like a devil in the night. After walking a few steps, Suonan felt weak and pushed Lian Xiangzi away, saying in a cold voice, "Go away, I'm poisoned. I can't move." Several black lines slid down Yunzi's forehead. There was no poisoning at all. It was just a strengthened version of the drug. Lian Xiangzi said nothing, holding Suonan with one hand and reaching behind her with the other. Yunzi chuckled, "You still want to leave like this?" Lian Xiangzi stopped moving abruptly, and looked at Yunzi, who only showed a pair of bright black eyes, with full vigilance. "Who are you?" "It doesn't matter who I am. What matters is that you can't leave. Do you want me to knock you all out and drag you away, or do you want me to leave on your own?" Lian Xiangzi looked at Suonan, thinking of Hu Teihao's behavior, and there was only cruelty in her eyes. Compared with falling into the hands of the enemy, staying with Hu Teihao was even more undignified. Lian Xiangzi helped Suonan to the Shan military camp. Feng Yangyu recognized her and looked at Yunzi in surprise. How could they let the enemy come to them? Yunzi glanced at Suonan and said to Lian Xiangzi, "He was just drugged. He will be fine in a while. Why should I believe you? If you don't believe me, try it and see if Hu Teihao will show mercy." Yunzi turned to Feng Yangyu and said, "Strip the prisoners' clothes and hang them on the city wall for public display." Yunzi's firm words stirred waves in Feng Yangyu's heart. In an instant, she glanced at Lian Xiangzi and Suonan, and said to Feng Yangyu, "Arrange a room for them and send some food." As soon as Yunzi finished speaking, she had already walked away, leaving Lian Xiangzi with a look of astonishment on her face. Looking at her back, a strange feeling for Yunzi quietly grew in her heart. When Hu Teihao heard that the person he sent had become the living signboard of Kandam City, he was so angry that he slammed the table, not to mention that Suonan and Lian Xiangzi had not returned yet. Hu Teihao took a sip of cold water, his eyes were sharp, and he ordered in a deep voice, "Strengthen patrols around the camp." Lian Xiangzi took the initiative to visit Yunzi. Yunzi was not surprised at all. She looked at the slightly embarrassed Lian Xiangzi leisurely and contentedly, without any hurry or panic. The two talked for a long time in Yunzi's room. She finally sighed and said, "You can go. Suonan can stay." Lian Xiangzi nodded and then disappeared from her sight. 3 days passed in a flash, and Shanxian still hadn't returned. The army was calm. Feng Yangyu followed Yunzi's advice and trained these clumsy soldiers. Yunzi held the Shenming divine whip in her hand and danced gracefully in the courtyard. Feng Yangyu saw that her whip skills were powerful and her movements were smooth, and even he, who had practiced martial arts since childhood, felt ashamed. She changed into tight clothes and returned to the command center. She crossed her legs and leisurely studied a military book. After a long time, she stretched her waist and saw that the time had come. Yunzi pondered and called Feng Yangyu, pointing to a river, "This place is hidden, guard it strictly, send people to check the food and grass, and don't make any mistakes in the transportation of food and grass." Feng Yangyu was puzzled and said slowly, "The stream is actually a remote mountain stream, rarely visited by people, with dangerous terrain and few people walking on it." Yunzi sat back, flipped through the book and said softly, "Our army is in urgent need of food and grass. Hu Teihao has not moved his troops. Today is the food season, what are you going to do?" Feng Yangyu suddenly realized Hu Teihao's plan to cut off the food supply, but he did not understand the meaning of the river. The food supply is difficult to transport, and the small river is the right path for it. It can trap me and make me confused. Feng Yangyu was amazed to see Yunzi was calm and composed, with a complicated look in his eyes. Food and fodder are the foundation of war. Feng Yangyu did not hesitate at all and sent people to check the food and fodder and went to the food and fodder storage place himself. Yunzi smiled, tapped her toes, and flew away like a swallow. As soon as he stepped into the grain warehouse, Yunzi's ears were filled with the clanging sound of weapons. He couldn't help but frown, and with a whoosh he drew out the Shenming divine whip and swung it towards Lian Xiangzi. Lian Xiangzi covered his arm that was hit by the whip, which was bloody, and his eyes were full of unwillingness. He staggered away. Then, Yunzi noticed the several small wounds on Feng Yangyu's hands. Without saying a word, she took out the medicine powder and gently applied it to him. Chapter 21 Towards Death. Her delicate little hands gently held up Feng Yangyu's rough hands and carefully sprinkled powder on them. Her long eyelashes looked extremely gentle in the sunlight, and even Feng Yangyu's heart was quietly wrapped in this warmth. The two men returned to the command post, just as a soldier rushed in. When the soldiers saw Yunzi, their voices trembled. In their hands, they were holding Shinsayan's tattered battle robe. The pattern on it showed the unique symbol of Shinsayan as a commander. Yunzi looked indifferent, but her heart was beating fast. She silently said in her heart, "Dad, are you okay?" The hands holding the cloak were shaking slightly, her fingers were clenched tighter and tighter, the joints turned white, but her face was calm. "Assemble 100,000 soldiers and horses immediately. Feng Yangyu will go with me. The rest of you will stay at the base camp and wait for my victorious return. If there is any mishap in these two cities, military law will be applied. There will be no leniency." Yunzi's eyes were sharp and she exuded the majesty of a commander. At this time, a young general shouted unconvincedly, "Who gives orders?" He widened his eyes and looked straight at Yunzi. Yunzi sneered in response, and glanced at the young general from the corner of her eyes. Feng Yangyu showed Shinsayan's jade pendant at the right time, and the young general's face froze and he lowered his head in shame. "In this military camp, military law is supreme. Why should I order you around?" "Because I have military orders." "Do you have any?" Yunzi's smile remained, but her tone became colder. "Commendations, listen to my orders. Lin Feng and Ling Yun will guard Kandan and Bianying City. The rest of you will follow me." Yunzi was dressed in black, her long hair fluttering in the wind, looking coldly at the border town ahead. Yunzi remembered correctly that this border town was originally the territory of our country, and was later given to Jufeng State. Looking at the deserted city wall, Yunzi was not surprised and decisively ordered an attack on the city. Feng Yangyu frowned and reminded, "Military advisor, there is no one on the city wall. I'm afraid there is an ambush. Hu Teihao is cunning and we need to act with caution." Yunzi displayed the firmness and confidence of a king, and said easily, "Just crash into it. I'll take care of anything that happens. I guess all the soldiers in the city over there are lying down by now." An evil smile appeared on the corner of her mouth, like a thorny rose blooming in the night, both dangerous and charming. Although Feng Yangyu didn't understand why Yunzi was so confident, he always trusted her wisdom. After all, even he himself was often convinced by her. The city gate burst open, and what came into view was the scene of Jufeng's soldiers sitting powerlessly. The generals were stunned, and Yunzi smiled with satisfaction when she saw this. Feng Yangyu switched back and forth between surprise and Yunzi's smug smile, his heart full of confusion. "I'm not going to reveal the ins and outs of this. First, lock up Jufeng's soldiers and tidy up the border town. You stay here to guard it. I'm worried about the others, so I'll hand them over to someone else." Yunzi seemed to have seen through Feng Yangyu's thoughts and kept him in suspense on purpose. She knew clearly that those soldiers were merely poisoned by the Croton water and it would be strange if they didn't have stomach upsets. As they were talking, a soldier came running over breathlessly to report that Hu Teihao was leading an army of 100,000 and approaching Bianying City. Yunzi's smile was still devilish, and she thought that Hu Teihao was no ordinary man and knew how to give others a taste of their own medicine. She led 50,000 elite soldiers back to Bianying City, but found that the south gate was empty. Her face darkened. "Quickly inform Lin Feng and Ling Yun not to confront Hu Teihao head-on." The soldiers rushed away, but unexpectedly Yunzi had already got there first. She ordered, "Guard the city gate and do not go out." Yunzi sent Yun Han, who instantly appeared at the south gate, and saw the soldiers struggling in the quicksand. She gave a solemn order, "Retreat to the city." The soldiers followed the order and looked back at Yunzi. Yunzi looked solemn, looking at the dense enemy troops, and suddenly an idea came to her mind, closing her eyes and throwing the bell down. She had never expected that Hu Teihao was so cunning, using the quicksand at the south gate to set an ambush, and Lin Feng and Ling Yun were completely unaware of this, resulting in heavy losses. Seeing that Yunzi was a woman, Hu Teihao smiled disdainfully, jumped onto the giant eagle's back, and said provocatively, "Little girl, surrender wisely, maybe I can spare your life." Amid the laughter of the Jufeng soldiers, Yunzi's face was as cold as frost, and her whole body was filled with coldness. With a wave of her hand, several ice arrows shot out, and the leading soldier fell down. Hu Taihao, with a gloomy face, flew into the air and rushed straight towards Yunzi. Yunhan glanced at the overconfident rain eagle, his eyes stern, and swung out a ball of fire, and the rain eagle dodged swiftly. Hu Taihao stared coldly at the clever fox, clenched his teeth, and exuded a biting coldness all over his body. Yunzi looked directly at Hu Taihao, her tone calm but with a force that could not be ignored. "Where is Shinsayan?" When Hu Taihao heard Shinsayan's name, he immediately looked back at Yunzi with contempt, and a sneer appeared on his lips. "That ignorant guy actually found his way into my camp. It's a pity that he has either been engulfed by the fire or lost his way in my mechanism and is heading for death." Yunzi looked back at Hu Taihao with the same contempt. At this moment, a low and firm voice came from behind. "You are wrong." Shinsayan and his guards jumped nimbly and landed steadily beside Yunzi. Shinsayan appeared on horseback. Although several days of escape had made him covered in dust, with his hair covered in dirt, it could not conceal his noble aura and commanding demeanor at all. "Do you think hiding will save you? I deliberately triggered your trap and killed some soldiers to create an illusion, so that you would mistakenly believe that I suffered heavy losses. Hu Taihao, you overestimate yourself." Before Shinsayan finished speaking, thousands of soldiers suddenly drew their daggers and launched a surprise attack on the soldiers of Jiufeng. Hu Taihao was stunned and could not accept the defeat in front of him. In an instant, a taste of rust rose in Hu Taihao's throat. He looked at Yunzi with unwillingness in his eyes, then mounted his horse and fled in panic. Yunzi did not chase after him, but hugged Shinsayan tightly, who had lost a lot of weight. After not seeing him for a few days, his skin color had changed from fair to a healthy wheat color, making him look even more handsome. Yunzi felt his strong heartbeat, and the long-lost emptiness in her heart was instantly filled. Shinsayan hugged Yunzi back, and the two returned to the room, and he immediately went to take a bath to relieve his fatigue. In this battle, our country won a great victory, and Hu Taihao's army was defeated with almost no effort. The legendary story of Yunzi and Shinsayan spread from then on. This pair of wise and brave generals defeated Hu Taihao, the legendary general of Jiufeng Kingdom, without any effort. "Little guy, bring me some clothes," Shinsayan called from the bathroom. Fortunately, the former official's mansion where they stayed had a spacious bathtub, which was just right for Shinsayan to relieve his fatigue from the past few days. As soon as Yunzi entered the room, she was caught by Shinsayan, who was hiding behind the door. With a big hand, he pulled her into the water and held her tightly. Chapter 22 Apologetic Smile. Yunzi gently stroked Shinsayan's slightly rough back. In just a few days, he seemed to have experienced many vicissitudes. Shinsayan was immersed in the fragrance of Yunzi's hair, with his eyes slightly closed. "Yunzi, I miss you so much." "Shinsayan, I miss you too." Until the sun set, Shinsayan and Yunzi went back to their rooms and fell into a deep sleep. The fatigue from not sleeping for several days finally found relief at this moment. At noon the next day, Shinsayan woke up slowly. As soon as he opened his eyes, he saw Yunzi concentrating on playing with the chessboard. Her hair was casually tied up, and a few strands of hair hung playfully beside her cheeks. Without makeup, she was as beautiful as a peeled egg, pure and elegant. Shinsayan looked at the picture, and the softest part of his heart was gently touched. The sunlight shone on Yunzi, and everything became exceptionally beautiful, like a dream. Yunzi looked up and met Shinsayan's shining eyes. She smiled gently, walked towards him and kissed him on the cheek. "Hurry up and wash up, the food is getting cold." Yunzi picked up Shinsayan's clothes, lifted the quilt and helped him put them on. Shinsayan smiled, his eyes as warm as the sunshine outside the window. Shinsayan enjoyed the care given by Yunzi contentedly. After finishing his meal and getting dressed, he went to the barracks. Yunzi stayed in the room to read, and suddenly she felt a pain in her neck and fainted. Lian Xiangzi looked at Yunzi coldly and quickly took her away. When Shinsayan came back, he saw books scattered all over the floor, but no sign of Yunzi. His heart tightened and he hurriedly summoned the patrolling soldiers. "Where is the military advisor?" Shinsayan's eyes were sharp. The soldier was so nervous facing the empty room that he was incoherent. I don't know, the military advisor never left." Shinsayan suppressed his anger. At this moment, a flying knife was accurately nailed to the door. He took the flying knife off and saw the words on it. "To save the beauty, I went to the top of Kandan mountain alone." Shinsayan angrily threw the flying knife to the ground, and the soldier was so scared that his hands and feet trembled. He took a deep breath, stretched his body, and ran straight to the top of Kandang Mountain. Hu Tuihao, you are in big trouble. When they reached the top of the mountain, they saw Lian Xiangzi and Yunzi, who was tied up tightly. Yunzi looked at the abyss below her feet, her face pale and her legs weak. Seeing Yunzi in a critical situation, Shinsayan was furious and shouted in a deep voice, "Come out!" Hu Tuihao appeared from the side of the cave, accompanied by his guard Yu Ying. He looked at Shinsayan with a gloomy face. "If you want to save her, hand over your martial token and tie yourself up." Shinsayan snorted disdainfully and responded with a sharp look. A famous general of Jiufeng country actually resorts to such despicable means. Hu Tuihao gnashed his teeth and said to Shinsayan, "Stop talking nonsense and give me the token, or your think tank will have to come into close contact with the cliff. You have 3 seconds to think about it." After saying that, he tightened the rope on Yunzi, pulled out the dagger, and started the countdown. Shinsayan's face was as gloomy as water, and bursts of coldness emanated from his whole body. "Deal." Shinsayan took out the token. Seeing this, Yunzi was extremely anxious. "Shinsayan, don't do this." Hu Tuihao ignored Yunzi's cries and was about to get the token when suddenly a dagger was placed across his neck. Hu Tuihao's expression suddenly changed, and he dared not move rashly. "Lian Xiangzi, what do you want to do? I am your adoptive father, you want to betray me." Lian Xiangzi sneered, "Adoptive father? Have you forgotten the scars on my body and the time you threw me to be humiliated by your men?" Yunzi's heart tightened when she heard this, and Lian Xiangzi's eyes were now full of hatred towards Hu Tuihao. The rain eagle's eagle eyes were fixed on Lian Xiangzi, and his gaze was full of murderous intent. Suddenly, Yuan pounced on Lian Xiangzi. Hu Tuihao took the opportunity to break free from the restraints and removed Lian Xiangzi's wrist with his backhand. Lian Xiangzi's face turned pale and she staggered back. Hu Tuihao kept his eyes on her, but unexpectedly Lian Xiangzi suddenly stopped and approached step by step. Yunzi knew something was wrong, so she pulled Shinsayan up and jumped onto the horse's back. At this moment, a man appeared behind Yunzi, his eyes covered by a black cloth. A man came hurriedly. "Xiangzi!" Suonan called out. Lian Xiangzi suddenly woke up, looked at Hu Tuihao, who was right in front of her. Her eyes became fierce again. Hu Tuihao's face changed, and he suddenly pushed Lian Xiangzi into the abyss. Seeing this, Yunzi whipped the triumphant Hu Tuihao, who fell to the ground. She controlled the whip of the black dance phoenix and ordered Yunhan to save Lian Xiangzi. Suonan pulled off the black cloth and stared at Hu Tuihao with murderous eyes. Hu Tuihao felt desperate at this moment. Yunhan accelerated forward and caught the falling lotus seeds, and everyone slowly rose into the air. As soon as Suonan saw Lian Xiangzi, he immediately hugged her tightly in his arms, and Lian Xiangzi's panic calmed down instantly. Then, the Xuanwu phoenix struck from mid-air, knocking down the rain eagle, which fell heavily on Hu Tuihao. The latter vomited blood. Lian Xiangzi and Suonan looked at each other coldly, and Suonan lightly wiped the dagger in his hand and ended Hu Tuihao's life. Shinsayan's large palm covered Yunzi's eyes. A warm feeling surged in Yunzi's heart. She turned around and hugged Shinsayan tightly. Suonan looked at the pale-faced Lian Xiangzi and pushed the bodies of Yu Ying and Hu Tuihao into the abyss. Then the two smiled at each other and felt relieved. Yunzi turned to look at Lian Xiangzi and carefully helped her reconnect her severed limbs. Lian Xiangzi managed to hold back her tears. Yunzi couldn't help but feel pity for Suonan and Lian Xiangzi. What kind of trauma did they experience in their childhood that made them so determined to join forces with her and put Hu Tuihao to death? After returning to the barracks, Feng Yangyu circled around Yunzi anxiously, fearing that she was injured. Shinsayan's face darkened, and he pulled Yunzi back to his side, staring at Feng Yangyu coldly, obviously warning her. Feng Yangyu realized that she had overstepped the line, and quickly smiled apologetically at Yunzi. Back in the room, Shinsayan let go of Yunzi's hand and sat on the bed alone. Yunzi knew that he was angry, so she quickly moved closer and sat on his lap in a naughty manner. "Shinsayan, don't be angry, I know I was wrong." Yunzi admitted her mistake obediently. Shinsayan snorted, "Wrong? You knew you were wrong but still dared to do such a dangerous thing? You even hid it from me and teamed up with that woman to get rid of Hu Tuihao. You're so stupid." Yunzi stuck out her tongue and thought, "How can I do anything if I tell you?" She could only keep this to herself, lest this gentleman get angry again. "Shinsayan, I was really wrong. Please forgive me this time. You will never do this again next time, okay? Yunzi's coquettish tone was so disgusting that even she herself felt it was corny. Only then did Shinsayan's expression ease a little. The next morning, Shinsayan and Yunzi were enjoying breakfast leisurely when a soldier came to report that Lian Xiangzi and Suonan wanted to see them. Yunzi was not surprised by this. Shinsayan did not have much affection for these two people. It was good enough that they dared to let the person he liked take risks and did not chase them out. But if he really did that, the one he loved would definitely make a big fuss. So Shinsayan simply pretended that he saw nothing. Chapter 23, Panic. Lian Xiangzi walked in holding Suonan's hand. Although her expression was still a little cold, it was no longer as fierce as before. Instead, she looked relaxed and at ease, which was rare. She looked directly at Yunzi, her eyes neither inferior nor arrogant, and said sincerely, Yunzi, can we join you? We grew up here, and we have no other skills except killing. You saved us, so let us protect you, okay? I will protect my own woman. Shinsayan interrupted unhappily. Yunzi immediately glared at him, and Shinsayan shut his mouth tactfully. Lian Xiangzi ignored Shinsayan's objection and fixed her eyes on Yunzi, waiting for a reply. Yunzi looked at the two of them and nodded gently, saying, okay, you can stay with me. You don't have to follow me all the time. The poison in you allows Hu Teihao to control you, but you are each other's antidote. Lian Xiangzi nodded, and Yunzi finally understood the reasons why she saw Lian Xiangzi doing those strange things on Mount Kandan. When we get back, I will try my best to detoxify you, but I can't guarantee success. Yunzi said calmly. Lian Xiangzi didn't expect Yunzi to help detoxify, and respect arose in her eyes. Suonan couldn't help but look at Yunzi again. Yunzi continued to eat with her head down. Go find the guard Mo Kuan to arrange accommodation, and leave for the court the day after tomorrow. Also, change into our clothes to avoid any trouble in the future. Lian Xiangzi agreed and left with Suonan. Yunzi turned her head and looked at Shinsayan's gloomy face, her heart full of confusion. What was this old man doing? Shinsayan gritted his teeth, wondering if this little guy would feel uncomfortable if he didn't make him angry. Shinsayan grabbed Yunzi's slender waist and pulled her towards him. Yunzi almost hit his forehead and glared at him in dissatisfaction. Mo Kuan? Calling him so intimately. Shinsayan's teasing made Yunzi frown. She was too lazy to pay attention to him, but considering his bad temper, she had to give in. How could that be possible? Yunzi responded. Shinsayan raised his eyebrows and looked at Yunzi with interest. Next time I hear you greeting someone so affectionately, I will hang him on the city gate as a warning to everyone, and then find someone to throw rotten eggs at him. When Yunzi heard this, her eyelids twitched involuntarily, and she wondered why this guy was so childish. Shinsayan, why are you only punishing men? Shinsayan looked at Yunzi with an expression of, you don't understand, and said, in this case, which man would dare to approach you? If they dare to do this, where would I put my face? When Yunzi heard this, she cursed in her heart, what an old fox. As the night deepened, Yunzi lay lazily in Shinsayan's arms. Shinsayan's slender fingers shuttled through Yunzi's hair, kneading it gently, and he never got tired of it. Shinsayan, when are we going home? Yunzi began to miss the tranquility of the Shin mansion. Wait 2 more days, and we'll go back once things are done. Shinsayan kissed Yunzi on the forehead. Do you think the same as I do? Shinsayan nodded. If there wasn't a traitor, how could Kandan city fall into Hu Teihao's hands so easily? Besides, only the locals know the quicksand area at the south gate, it's impossible without a traitor. Yunzi chuckled, listening to Shinsayan's strong heartbeat, and thought to herself, the head of the Shin family is the head of the Shin family, he can do anything. In the dark, the hidden figure was shocked when he heard the word traitor, and almost stepped on the tiles. It was not until there was no movement on the roof that Yunzi poked Shinsayan's chest, old fox. Shinsayan lowered his head and saw Yunzi's smiling eyes. Her every frown and smile was captivating. Little guy, are you trying to seduce me? Yunzi noticed that the atmosphere was becoming increasingly heated, her face turned dark, and she looked helplessly at Shinsayan, wondering if she had just smiled, how could it be considered a temptation? The next day, Yunzi called Feng Yangyu and said, General Feng, gather all the people in the government office of Kandan City. No one can be left behind. Feng Yangyu said he understood. Shinsayan took Yunzi and walked into the Kandan County government office, looking at a group of frightened soldiers. After a moment, Yunzi waved her hand and said lightly, "Okay, go away and get busy with your own things." Shinsayan's eyes swept across the dispersing crowd and unconsciously lingered on a certain figure for a moment. The county magistrate was trembling with fear, sweating profusely, and his legs were a little weak. Shinsayan slowly opened his lips, and his words carried an unquestionable aura of kingship. "Your subordinates need to be trained. If you can't manage Kandan city well, you will be waiting to clean up the mess." The county magistrate was hesitant and wished Shinsayan would leave immediately. Shinsayan did not delay any longer and pulled Yunzi away. "Shinsayan, we are thinking the same thing. That man's steps are steady and powerful, and his walking posture is different from that of ordinary people. It is obvious that he is a well-trained soldier." Shinsayan nodded in approval. "How come you are so smart?" After saying that, he rubbed Yunzi's head lovingly, his eyes full of smiles and appreciation. After confirming that there was no one around, he jumped in without hesitation, looking at Lian Xiangzi with a stern look. "You betrayed me." Lian Xiangzi sneered in response. "Are you talking about betraying Hu Teihao or Jufeng Kingdom? I remember what he did to me, and he will definitely die. Moreover, his arrogant character will sooner or later make us lose. We are not bad, it's time for us to take the stage." His eyes were sharp and full of disdain. "Your ambitions are not small, but don't let me find out that you betrayed Jufeng, otherwise, you will have nowhere to be buried." Despite the cold stare, Lian Xiangzi didn't care and played with her nails nonchalantly. "What should I do next? This is not a long-term solution." He did not hesitate to close his eyes and think deeply. Seeing his arrogant attitude, Lian Xiangzi felt sarcastic in his heart. Lian Xiangzi suddenly threw a dart, and without blinking, he dodged to the side, saying in a chilling voice, "You want to kill me?" Lian Xiangzi gnashed her teeth, full of hatred. "You think you did it perfectly, and those who insulted me were all arranged by you, right? You want me to be willing to work for you? You underestimate me too much." Lian Xiangzi said nothing more and rushed towards Bu Dan to start fighting. Suonan couldn't bear to watch it anymore, so he rushed forward and held Lian Xiangzi in his arms. Yunzi waved the magic whip, which instantly locked onto Buden, leaving Buden dumbfounded. Shinsayan sneered and said, "County magistrate, it's time to change your position." The county magistrate's legs went limp, his eyes filled with fear and surprise. "You guys teamed up to trick me. Lian Xiangzi, you vicious woman, if anything happens to the king, I won't forgive you even if I become a ghost." He could no longer maintain his calm expression, his eyes widened and he stared at Lian Xiangzi and Suonan, as if he wanted to tear them into pieces. Suonan raised his eyes, cold as ice, and stared straight at him. "If you hadn't instigated the king to invade Ranchi, how could it have come to this? Do you think the king can't see your ambition? Accept your fate, your beloved king will die because of you." He was not afraid of the blood flowing from the corners of his mouth and had an unwilling look on his face until his death. Chapter 24, Homecoming. Yunzi raised her eyebrows and said, "Wow, the world of the ancients was also quite open, with male-male pairings, so fresh." Lian Xiangzi didn't say anything, picked up the dagger and went to Bu Dan. Suonan was quick and grabbed Lian Xiangzi, shaking his head. "Don't let your hands be stained with dust again, I will take care of it." As soon as the matter was settled, Shinsayan returned to the camp, strode onto the training platform, stood like a mountain, and looked down at the huge sea of soldiers. "Now, Kandan and the border town are back in our arms, but they need protectors. Warriors, you are the backbone of the country. Who is willing to stay and stand guard for our homeland and defend this land? Please stand up." Several old generals staggered out and looked at Shinsayan, their eyes full of nostalgia for the past Bei Mingguan, tears welling up in their eyes. "Marshal, we are willing to defend this territory. We have followed General Shin here for decades, and we are worried about leaving it to others. We have no ties, no wives or children, and we only hope to stay here and protect our homeland." Shinsayan looked at these veterans and nodded solemnly. "Okay. Biancheng, Bienying and Kandan are now handed over to you. Report to the court in detail every 3 months. If you have any difficulties, just let them come to me. I will do my best to support you." After that, Shinsayan gave a solemn order to the soldiers. "All soldiers, listen up, break camp immediately and prepare to return victoriously." Shinsayan suddenly turned around and pulled Luoyi back to the camp. Luoyi looked at the silent Shinsayan and hugged him tightly. "Grandpa Shinsayan, the dead are gone. This is the land your father defended with his life. You fought for it with your life, and that's enough. He will be proud of you in his grave. Shinsayan looked down at Luo Yi, and a smile suddenly appeared on his lips. Little clever ghost, have you got into my heart? How come you know everything I'm thinking? Yunzi poked Shinsayan's face lightly and said with a smile, it's clearly written on your face, how could you not know? The two looked at each other and smiled. The next morning, just as the sky was getting light, the camp was already busy. The soldiers were packing their bags in an orderly manner, preparing to embark on their journey home. Shinsayan, dressed in battle robes, stood in the middle of the camp with a sharp gaze, scanning every corner. Yunzi was packing her things. She was wearing a light green dress, which fluttered gently in the wind, like a touch of fresh green in spring. There was a hint of playfulness between her eyebrows and a faint smile on the corners of her mouth. Shinsayan walked up to Yunzi and Ama and asked softly, Yunzi, what are your plans for returning to the court this time? Yunzi raised her head and said, after returning to the court, I will naturally find an opportunity to see the prosperity of this palace. As the sun gradually rose, the soldiers in the camp were ready to go. Shinsayan mounted his warhorse and shouted, all soldiers, march out. The soldiers responded in unison, with a mighty voice, like thunder. Shinsayan and Yunzi walked side by side, the sound of horse hooves echoing in the morning air, carrying a sense of heroism and ambition. During the journey, Shinsayan talked with Yunzi from time to time. After several days of traveling, Shinsayan and Yunzi finally arrived in the capital. To celebrate their triumphant return, the emperor specially arranged a grand banquet in the palace. At the banquet, civil and military officials gathered together and the atmosphere was very lively. Shinsayan and Yunzi sat on the left and right sides of the emperor, becoming the focus of everyone's attention. The emperor raised his glass and said loudly, General Shin, you have returned victoriously this time and have made great contributions to the country. I am here to raise my glass to congratulate you. Shinsayan and Yunzi stood up and raised their glasses in return. Your Majesty, you are too kind. We are just doing our duty. At the banquet, everyone was toasting and laughing. The banquet did not end until late at night. The next day, Shin Yuming came to Yunzi's yard and took her to the lake. In the pavilion, Shin Yuming stood quietly, the breeze blowing gently on his long gown. He had a handsome face, and just by gazing into the distance, he looked like a fairy from a painting descending to the mortal world, detached from the world. His eyes were deep, and there seemed to be a myriad of thoughts in his dark eyes. No one could match his wisdom and ambition. Yunzi stared at his back. When they met again, all the memories of her past life came flooding back to her. She clenched her fists secretly, and her eyes were cold. Shin Yuming seemed to sense something, turned around and chuckled, Yunzi. Shin Yuming. Yunzi responded coldly. Her attitude was distant and she gave off an aura that kept people at a distance. Shin Yuming's body stiffened slightly, but he still had a smile on his face. He said in a gentle voice, Yunzi, I understand that you are angry. I have already explained what happened last time. The encounter with Jiao Jiao was purely a coincidence. There is nothing else. If you feel that my words were inappropriate, I would like to apologize here. Shin Yuming lowered his eyelids slightly, and there seemed to be 1,000 kinds of pain in his eyes. If he didn't know the person well, he might really be fooled by this disguise. Yunzi signaled her maid Jilan to pay attention to her surroundings, and she slowly walked forward. She stood in front of Shin Yuming, her eyes firm, and she smiled sweetly. Shin Yuming, why do you need to apologize? Besides, you are not at fault. Why did you invite me here today? Yunzi spoke firmly and drew a clear line in indifference. Shin Yuming looked at Yunzi's coldness with confusion in his eyes. He believed that he was innocent. They hadn't seen each other for a while and their feelings should have deepened. How could it turn out like this? Yes, it must have been that misunderstanding. He was seen with Jiao Jiao, so he became jealous. Thinking of this, Shin Yuming took out a brocade bag from his sleeve and handed it to Yunzi. This is what I got in Zuzhu. I should have given it to you in time, but I was unable to visit the Yi mansion. Yunzi watched the situation quietly without reaching out to take it. She knew Shin Yuming very well, and he definitely did not choose the hairpin himself, but must have sent someone to bring it in a hurry. Seeing that Yunzi was indifferent, Shin Yuming coughed awkwardly, opened the bag and took out the hairpin. When I first saw this hairpin, I thought of you. It suits you very well. After he finished speaking, he took a step closer, shortening the distance between them, and lowered his head to look at Yunzi affectionately. Yunzi faced him who was so close to her, they were almost leaning against each other and could hear each other's breathing. In her previous life, she loved him as her life and gave him everything just to make him smile. And how did he treat her? He had no love in his heart and only used Madame Yi for her power. He even treated her as a plaything and allowed her to be bullied. In the end, he cruelly murdered Madame Yi and displayed her head to the public. How dare he? Such a ruthless person, with such a dark and hard heart, could do such a cruel thing. Yunzi stood there in a daze, breathing rapidly, her fists clenched. Suppressing her hatred had exhausted her strength, and the taste of blood filled the air on her tongue. Shin Yuming. Shin Yuming. Shin Yuming smiled, not noticing the hatred in Yunzi's eyes, and raised his hand to gently insert the hairpin into her hair. Chapter 25 Climbing the Branches. Yunzi, I have a good eye for picking things. This hairpin is very beautiful, just like you. His eyes were as gentle as a spring stream, as if they could drown everyone who looked at them, making people unconsciously intoxicated by them. Over the years, you have grown into a beautiful lady, no longer the little girl following me. I remember that time, you insisted on climbing a tree to see the baby birds, and I held you up and helped you climb to the branch. As a result, you slipped and almost fell down. Fortunately, I caught you in time. Their eyes met, and Shin Yuming's hand gently stroked Yunzi's face, as gently as if he was holding a treasure. At that time, you secretly gave me a kiss when I wasn't paying attention. Do you remember? Shin Yuming's eyes flashed with a playful light. Yunzi's fists clenched tighter and tighter, she didn't know how she managed to stand. How could I not remember? Those past events were still vivid in my mind. Every moment I spent with Shin Yuming, his words, his eyes, were deeply engraved in my heart. It was these clear memories that made the pain even more unforgettable. Since he has no intention of love, why does he weave so many heart-warming love webs? You once said that you would never marry anyone else in this life. Shin Yuming whispered slowly, approaching slowly, until the two of them were so close that they could count each other's eyelashes. Now, I tell you, I only want to marry you in this life. Yunzi, do you understand my heart? Lies. All lies. He was cheating from the beginning to the end. He married Jiao Jiao and doted on her. Yunzi felt as if her heart was being cut by a knife. The more memories came to her mind, the more painful it became. She almost suffocated. Shin Yuming. Tears rolled down her cheeks unconsciously, and her beautiful eyes looked even more sad and touching at this moment. Shin Yuming was stunned. Yunzi, what's wrong with you? That's enough. Yunzi interrupted coldly, I have forgotten those things, don't mention them again. She stepped back, wiped away her tears, and returned to her usual indifference. Yunzi, why are you always like this? Why do you always want to avoid me recently? Shin Yuming was heartbroken and anxious. In order to gain the influence of old Madame Yi and advance in his career, he had to win Yunzi's full trust. This should have been a natural thing. Everyone knew that Yunzi was in love with him. Why did everything change when they met again after a while? If there is nothing else, I'll take my leave first. Thank you, Chaizi. Yunzi said coldly and was about to turn around and leave. Shin Yuming stared at her back in a daze, speechless. Shin Yuming stood alone in the pavilion, his heart in turmoil. He originally thought that he would be able to get engaged to Yunzi after returning to Beijing, but now it seems that Yunzi will never change her mind. What happened during this period? What else did he not know? Shin Yuming secretly clenched his fist and sneered. No matter what happens, we must never give up on Yunzi. Yunzi. In the past, I always felt irritated when I thought of her, but now when I think of her again, her cold and aloof figure appears before my eyes. Under that beautiful face, there is a deep sorrow. She was no longer the little tail who would only stare at him blankly and follow him everywhere. Why did she suddenly feel a sense of emptiness in her heart? Shin Yuming put his hand over his chest, a barely perceptible pain quietly spreading. Facing Yunzi's indifference, he was inexplicably displeased. Unexpectedly, behind him, Yunzi did not go far away. She walked as lightly as a cat and quietly approached Shin Yuming's back. It was only 2 steps away, within reach, but Shin Yuming was completely immersed in his thoughts and was unaware of the presence behind him. Shin Yuming. Yunzi's eyes were as cold as ice, staring coldly, her slender fingers trembling slightly, her whiteness showing determination. This pavilion was located on the top of the rockery, several feet above the ground. If you lose your footing, you could suffer a fracture at best, or even die at worst. Complex emotions intertwined in her eyes, and she shook her head slightly. The deeper she loved, the deeper the pain, like a thorn in her bone, tormenting her day and night. She had heard Shin Yuming's oath in her previous life. Yunzi, no matter if I'm rich or poor, no matter what my future holds, are you willing to stay by my side and grow old together? I will only marry Yi Yunzi in this life. The low-voiced promise and the warm embrace seemed like a dream. When I woke up, only cruelty remained. Shin Yuming. Yi Yunzi frowned and moved her hands slightly. With a gentle push, everything would be over. Shin Yuming, you should pay the price for what you have done. Use blood and tears, pain and regret to repay your debt to your grandmother and your cruel methods. Her hand had already touched the hem of Shin Yuming's clothes, and the hatred in her eyes was as dark as ink, almost swallowing up her rationality. Shin Yuming, go to hell. At the last moment, Yi Yunzi stopped, stared at Shin Yuming, and her heart returned to calm. Yes, how can we let him go so easily? His sins must make him suffer unbearable pain and kneel down to beg for mercy, only then can we get rid of the hatred in our hearts. Shin Yuming turned around and saw Yi Yunzi standing behind him. He was slightly surprised and said, Yunzi, why are you? Yi Yunzi smiled lightly, her eyes curved, as if she was as bright as when they first met, this hairpin. I like it very much, thank you. You? Shin Yuming was stunned, confused, but seeing her smiling face, he couldn't help but feel happy. As long as you like it, I will buy more for you in the future. Beneath Yi Yunzi's smile, her eyes were deep, hiding a secret that no one knew. Shin Yuming didn't understand why Yi Yunzi had changed, but when he saw her smiling and no longer cold, his heart softened a little and he had no time to investigate. He didn't even know that it was a matter of life and death just now. The rockery was so high that if he was not careful, he would be crushed to pieces. How is Grandma? If I have time, I would like to visit you. Shin Yuming spoke softly, with a hint of pleading. If Yi Yunzi introduced him, he would make a better impression in front of his grandmother and achieve his goal more quickly. Yi Yunzi's eyes were cold, and although she still had a smile on her face, she had a hint of coldness in her eyes. Alas, just like in her previous life, she was so eager to see old Madame Yi. She gently lowered her eyelids and said with regret, Grandma loves quietness. Recently, she has been following the advice of an expert and resting at home. I see. Shin Yuming frowned, then I'll visit Grandma another day. Yi Yunzi nodded and stood by the pavilion. The smile on her lips gradually faded, hiding in a corner where no one noticed. The chill spread quietly. It seemed useless for Shin Yuming to stay, so he found an excuse and hurriedly left. Yi Yunzi stopped in the pavilion for a moment, looking at something not far away, her eyes moistened. Just as she was about to turn around and leave, her body suddenly stopped. Who is that figure on the rockery beside the pavilion? When did it appear? She narrowed her eyes and stared at the man. He was lying there leisurely, and it would be hard to find him if you didn't look for him. He slowly stood up and looked at her. That particularly eye-catching face, looking up slightly, it seems that one can glimpse his deep black eyes, and an unruly smile appears at the corner of his mouth. It's him again, Shinsayan. Yi Yunzi frowned slightly, wondering why he came here. Chapter 26, So Busy. Every time we met, it seemed to be at the most awkward moment, and those little secrets that I didn't want others to see seemed to be discovered by him. She subconsciously gripped the railing, her fingers slowly tightening. Is this a coincidence, or is he waiting on purpose? Could it be that he saw what happened just now? From his position, he had a clear view of the situation in the pavilion. If he had been paying attention to this side, then wouldn't he have also seen the scene where she tried to make Shin Yuming fall? A cold light flashed in Yi Yunzi's eyes, and her mind was filled with a myriad of thoughts. Shinsayan happened to also cast his gaze towards the pavilion, and their eyes collided in the air. He just glanced at it lightly and then looked away. You? Yi Yunzi wanted to say something but stopped herself. Seeing that his head had completely turned away, she swallowed the words back. Maybe he didn't see it. Yes, he may not have noticed. Yi Yunzi comforted herself, took a few deep breaths, and turned to leave. With her departure, the pavilion returned to peace. Shinsayan looked up at the sky, his dark eyes deepened. You seem different. I thought you were still that timid person, but now it seems that is not the case. He raised the corners of his mouth and smiled. On the other side, in the guest room, Jiao Jiao finished washing up and finally got rid of the mess on her body. She breathed a sigh of relief. Where did Xiaomai go? She snorted coldly and grabbed the clothes beside her and put them on. Xiaomai said she was going outside to investigate the situation and has not returned yet. Just as I was thinking about it, the door was suddenly pushed open. Xiaomai, she called. The person came silently, without making a sound, and then lifted the curtain and walked in. Jiao Jiao turned around and was stunned. She was going to attend a banquet at the Marquis mansion today, so she had to dress up properly and show off her charm so that Yunzi would lose Shen Yuming's attention. She wanted to hold his heart firmly. Yunzi sat quietly in the living room. She came to the Marquis mansion to attend a banquet today. She picked up a piece of cake and tasted it carefully. The pastries in the Marquis mansion were indeed excellent. Soon, the noble ladies and girls who had left earlier came back one after another, led by Miss Su Yu from the Marquis's mansion. They surrounded her and vied with each other to show their courtesy. Lin Yiqing, the third young lady of the Lin mansion, followed Su Yu closely and spoke at the right time. There must be a talent show at the annual gathering of the Marquis mansion. This year is no exception. I believe that all the young ladies have been eager to show their talents. This year's prize is a pair of purple snow jade bracelets bestowed by the queen herself. As usual, the winner will get it. Su Yu said as she waved her hand to signal the maid to present the box containing the jade bracelets. When the lid of the box was opened, a pair of warm purple jade bracelets came into view. They were extremely precious purple jade. In addition, the jade bracelet was made by the queen, which added to its extraordinary value. Everyone's eyes lit up. If she could win the first prize, she would not only win the title of a talented woman, but would also become a legend in the capital. Su Yu looked around at everyone and said, "Not only us, but there are also many gentlemen watching behind the scenes. Maybe we can win the favor of some lord. Of course, this is just to add to the fun. There's no need to be too nervous." Su Yu smiled faintly, and these words made the girls blush. Today's gathering was attended by all outstanding young men from various aristocratic families. They were young, promising, and handsome, and many women present had already developed secret feelings for them. The talent show was not held in the hall, but moved to the garden of the Marquis mansion. The garden was vast, with small bridges and flowing water, scattered rockeries, and picturesque scenery. No one knew that the backyard of the Marquis mansion was so elegant, which showed that the Marquis had put a lot of effort into it. The luxury of the Marquis mansion is comparable to that of a royal palace, and everyone was intoxicated while viewing it. The corridor was surrounded by veil, and everything seemed to be covered with a layer of dream. The pavilion was filled with handsome nobles, and even princes were among them. The scene was spectacular. The light gauze is like a dream, gently separating men and women. Although it is popular for men and women to sit at the same table and drink together, Miss Su Yu of the Marquis's mansion deliberately arranged this layer of gauze, which not only arouses people's curiosity to explore the mystery, but also prevents the girls from being moved and losing their sense of proportion. It started, someone whispered. The garden was instantly filled with laughter and vitality. Everyone was trying their best to show their best style. Yunzi looked up at the pavilion, where many people were gathered. She knew that Shen Yuming must be among them, and Shen Xian would not be absent either. Her eyes turned slightly, and she walked slowly into the venue with the crowd, disappearing into the crowd like a flower in the mist, with no visible shape. Su Yu had a gentle smile on her face and looked around at everyone. Spring is bright and beautiful, the fragrance of flowers is everywhere, butterflies are dancing, and the light gauze is blowing on our faces. Why don't we use flowers as the theme today? Whether it's music, chess, calligraphy or painting, as long as it is related to flowers, it's all fine. I wonder which beauty is willing to take the lead and win the first prize. When everyone heard this, their hearts were moved and they looked at each other. No one wanted to be the first one. One reason was that they were shy and their faces would turn red and their hearts would beat fast in front of everyone. The other reason was that they were nervous and thought that if they failed, they would become a laughing stock. Seeing this, Su Yu smiled and said, "Why don't I throw out some ideas? This scenery reminds me of a poem. Someone, prepare paper and ink." The servant quickly set up the table, prepared the writing brush and ink, and Su Yu took up the pen, thought for a moment, and then wrote a poem in one breath. Her handwriting was elegant and refined, and was praised by Mr. Su, a master of calligraphy in Beijing. After the words are dried, they are available for everyone to appreciate. Wonderful! Lin Yiqing was the first to praise, with surprise flashing in his eyes. The peach blossoms in the mountain temple are in full bloom. What a profound artistic conception. Yu, this word is becoming more and more elegant. As soon as Lin Yiqing opened his mouth, others quickly echoed her and praised Su Yu to the skies. No one was unwilling to take this opportunity to curry favor with her. Su Yu smiled proudly. Thanks to Mr. Su's teachings, my calligraphy has improved. Mr. Su? He doesn't accept disciples easily. It seems that Miss Su is really outstanding to be in his eyes. Su Yu accepted all the compliments without objection. After all, in the capital, no one could match her in both talent and beauty. In terms of power and beauty, she was comparable to a princess. How could those ordinary women compare with her? On the side, the servant reported in a low voice and walked towards the pavilion with Su Yu's handwriting, obviously to let the young men there have a look. Su Yu turned around and nodded slightly in the direction of the pavilion as a greeting to everyone. Following Su Yu's demonstration, everyone showed off their talents, reciting poems or playing the piano, making the scene very lively. Lin Yiqing's eyes swept across the crowd and finally stopped on Jiao Jiao, with a sneer on his lips. Regarding what happened before, she believed that Jiao Jiao had played a trick on her. She was still angry, so she deliberately said, "This is the first time that fourth sister has participated in such a gathering. Please be more tolerant and don't laugh at her. Fourth sister, what talents have you prepared for everyone to see?" As soon as these words were spoken, everyone's eyes were focused on Jiao Jiao. Everyone knew clearly that Jiao Jiao was the daughter of a concubine and grew up outside. She was not welcomed back to the Lin residence until this year. Naturally, her boudoir arts such as music, chess, calligraphy and painting could not compare with those of the young ladies who were strictly trained since childhood. Jiao Jiao lowered her head, a hint of embarrassment appearing on her face, like a mimosa meeting the breeze. Chapter 27, Terrified. I'm not very skilled, so I can't compare to you sisters. Please don't make fun of me. No way, how could we? Lin Yiqing said, putting on an appearance of deep sisterly affection, but her mind was calculating, and only she knew the feeling. Yunzi's eyes lightly swept over Jiao Jiao, and saw her lowering her head and smiling, her cheeks flushed, looking innocent and naive, as if she was really not prepared for anything. But don't forget, Jiao Jiao's scheming is as deep as the sea. Acting is as natural to her as drinking water. How could she embarrass herself in such an occasion? Jiao Jiao mustered up her courage and said, I have practiced a piece of stunning dance. If possible, I hope someone can accompany me. Someone, call the musician. Su Yu nodded and gave the order. The piano music rose up, and the exciting melody rippled in the air. Under the expectant gaze of everyone, Jiao Jiao turned lightly, her tulle skirt swaying in the wind, and her graceful figure instantly locked everyone's attention. Her dancing steps are so precise that it takes years of hard practice to achieve this. Lin Yiqing secretly clenched her fists. She had never expected Jiao Jiao to be able to do this. At the end of the song, Jiao Jiao stopped dancing and bowed with a smile. Excuse me for my poor performance. Compared with your talents, I am far behind. Although she said so, her Jinghong dance was already stunning. Her humble words were just a courtesy and no one would take them seriously. Su Yu frowned slightly and looked at Lin Yiqing. Your sister is really not simple. Yeah. I didn't expect that either. Lin Yiqing looked a little embarrassed, as Jiao Jiao had stolen the limelight. Her dancing posture amazed the young men in the pavilion, and they all speculated who the woman dancing like a fairy was. That is Lin Fu Jiao Jiao, Jiao Jiao. I thought she was a beauty the last time I saw her, but I didn't expect her dancing skills were so outstanding. For a moment, voices of praise rose everywhere. The dancing posture was indeed breathtaking, and even the dancers in ordinary dance studios could hardly reach it. Everyone was marveling at the sight, but there was one person who just stared straight ahead, gazing quietly into the distance, oblivious to the beauties and scenery around him. Sai Yang, this Jinghong dance doesn't catch your eye. The man said as he picked up the pot and filled a glass of wine for Shen Sai Yang. Shen Saiyan came back to his senses and smiled calmly, not bad. The short and perfunctory words clearly did not catch his eye. Your Highness the Seventh Prince is having fun in this Marquis's mansion, aren't you afraid of causing trouble? Shen Saiyan raised his eyebrows and looked at the man, who had a cynical smile on his face. Why not? You're already here, so why should I be absent? It's been a while since we two brothers have had a toast and a chat. Come on. The two of them drank together, and no one dared to approach the stone table because of their extraordinary identities. One is the Honorable Seventh Prince Beili Yang, and the other is Shen Saiyan, the head of the Shen family in the capital. He is a recognized handsome man in the capital, and his beauty is enough to make the bright moonlight hide behind the clouds in shame. His face was as gentle as jade, his features were delicate, his deep eyes were black and white, as if he could see into people's hearts, and there was a kind of detached and free and easy air in the faint smile on his lips. It was precisely because of his good looks and outstanding talent that he was deeply favored by the emperor. He had been frequently in and out of the palace since he was a child and had a close friendship with the princes. The emperor doted on the emperor and granted almost every request as long as it was not excessive. He was never stingy with rewards, which made other noble children envious and jealous. Their stunning dance is indeed quite impressive. The seventh prince was still reminiscing about the scene, and the woman's dancing posture seemed to still appear before his eyes. The fourth young lady of the Lin mansion, Jiao Jiao? Why haven't I heard of her before? Someone nearby explained, she is the daughter of the new concubine. It is said that she has been wandering outside for many years. She was found a few days ago, and Master Lin took the mother and daughter back to the Lin mansion. The seventh prince nodded and whispered, so she is a daughter born out of wedlock. Really? Just as he finished speaking, a drumbeat suddenly sounded. What is this performance? Everyone looked at each other in bewilderment. Normally, there were mostly musical instruments such as zithers, harps, flutes and pipes, but the sudden and rapid drumbeats left everyone confused. Shinsayan also looked over there, and once he did, he couldn't look away. Behind the tulle stood a woman, tall and well-proportioned, with more heroism and capability than an ordinary woman. Just then a gust of wind blew by, gently lifting their veil, and the woman's face gradually appeared. The woman was wearing a silver white long dress. Under the sunlight, her skin looked particularly delicate and refined, as if she was a fairy from heaven. Her eyes seemed to have come out of a painting, with a hint of coldness and distance in them. She lowered her eyes slightly, as if to draw a clear line between herself and the world. Everyone stared blankly at the beautiful face that was revealed for a moment. When the veil fell again, covering the vague face, it left a deep impression on people and was unforgettable. What a beauty! Just like the rare snow lotus on the Chenshan Mountains. That glance just now felt like a fairy who had strayed into the human world. Some men couldn't help but sigh, their gazes lingering for a long time, unwilling to look away. Shinsayan's eyes also rippled. He was usually calm, but at this moment, he underwent subtle changes because of this woman. Yunzi, he muttered in a low voice. Yunzi, from the first time he saw her, Shinsayan felt that she was an extremely beautiful woman, and her beauty was not only in her appearance, but also in her kind heart. His eyes were firmly attracted and he was unwilling to look away. Yunzi, Yunzi. He whispered repeatedly, as if he wanted to engrave this name into his heart. At the same time, the floodgates of memory were quietly opened, and scenes from the past flashed through my mind. Yunzi, we have indeed met. It was not in the backyard of the Lin residence, nor was it any other ordinary place. That day, pain and heartbeat coexisted, and it was unforgettable. The corners of Shinsayan's mouth curled up, revealing a gentle smile. That smile was as warm as the ice and snow melting in spring, and it seemed to be able to warm people's hearts. He quietly touched his chest, where he seemed to still feel the pain of the past, as if a knife was piercing his heart and stirring cruelly, trying to dig his heart out, causing him excruciating pain. At that time, his blood was almost drained out, and he was not declared dead until the last moment of his life. He thought he was dead. But when he opened his eyes again, he found that he was still alive and well, and he had returned to the time 7 years ago when everything had not yet begun. He was Shinsayan, the distinguished head of the Shin family, and that man was just a prince at that time. Shinsayan was a loyal guy, so loyal that when he saw that his own Shin clan was planning to rebel, he made up his mind to destroy his mother's clan with his own hands. Since then, he has become the dreaded King of Hell. He froze all the hardships he had experienced and wholeheartedly assisted the fourth Prince Bailey in ascending the throne, making him the emperor above all others.